Hey guys, what's going on? So it's yet another stream here with me. And about as prepared as the previous streams. Actually not as bad. I think I'm going to be a little more active this stream. We just see the beginning comments here. Glad you're finally back. You're alive with no activity on your Rumble. Yeah, no, they almost got me, but I survived. I managed to escape. You know how incompetent Canadian government officials are, right? Spark7922, what's up? First time catching a stream. Hey, how you doing? And Sikia Duquin, hey Mercer, hey, how you doing? Over for early cells. It never began, regardless of how early or late you are. It's over just as you arrive. And Anton is asking, will you speak of what we spoke before? Well, as a matter of fact, you did bring up an article to me that I'm going to be going through a little bit later in the stream. I'm going to get a little bit of custodial stuff out of the way first. But it's actually quite an interesting topic because there's this mythology that I'm seeing that really needs to be popped. I thought I did it before, but I'm going to have to go back and recap it because there's people who seem to think that the AI revolution in technology is going to create a situation where everybody's going to become an enlightened plumber and electrician. And because these are all male-dominated jobs, it's going to be like a masculine takeover again. And it's just it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the labor market works. It's not entirely false, but there's an enormous amount of exaggeration here and overestimation. So we're going to be going over that. And also we're going to do a bit of a wrap-up with Iran. I'm going to be mentioning it in later streams as well. But this is going to be the last time where I go into like a lecture about it. Or like where I go into the details, nitty-gritty of it. Because I don't think we're going to see much dramatic change from the strategic situation now. And given the nature of the streaming that I do, I don't really see much of a use in getting deep into the geopolitics unless it's like really demanded because it's not directly relevant to us, you know? Like it's relevant in terms of like how is this going to impact the economy globally. Other than that though, it's, you know, like if Iran wins this thing, it's going to boost their prestige in the Middle East and that's great for them. But it's like, okay, how does this affect us in Europe? And as a matter of fact, it's interesting to see the fear-mongering about the energy crisis that's coming. And I contributed a little bit to it as well, because it is something to be afraid of. But I think that in the coming decades, I would say 10, 20 years tops, we're going to be faced with a much more severe issue, which is the coming woman shortage. And I'm going to recap the demographic stuff that I talked about in previous videos, like my first video I made, because for some reason people have difficulty understanding it. I think it's fairly simple, but I'm going to try and explain it briefly again, and I'm going to project what the demographic pill means in the future, now that birth rates are tanking across the globe. So we're going to be discussing that. But before I do that, I have a Discord server that I've created. It is the Cope Den. And I've had a relatively open door policy with it. Like, you have to interview with me first on VC in order to get in. But due to the demand and also due to the problems with vetting that I'm having, I'm going to be switching it to super chatters only. There's no actual monetary limit as to what you have to contribute, but just something, so that it's a way of controlling the flow of people coming in and making sure that they're not causing trouble, just in case, you know. If there's any popularity, I might go into the reasons why we set up these kind of tolls in the old Discords that we ran during COVID, back when we first started to build our sphere. We started with the vetting system I have now, and then we transitioned to something a little more investment intensive because of people coming in and not taking things very seriously, you know. Some fun stories, including women trying to get in as well. I don't think that'll happen now, because back during COVID, because everybody was locked indoors, they were forced out of necessity to find other ways to entertain themselves. And of course, getting into inky Discords and becoming the center of attention, a lot of women would love to do that, right? We don't really get that now, but it was still quite fun. Anyways, yeah, I'm Medipilled now, yeah. Actually, you know, it's funny. Medican suggested that to me, and I said no. I'm just going to maybe do, I'll give cosmetic rolls if people want to donate. But I actually had to go in and do some moderation and kick a few people because of problems that they were causing. And I think people will obey the rules a little better. And by the way, just to be clear, I'm not really strict when it comes to the rules. My rules are pretty relaxed, but you need to follow them. And it's like, you can't go on VC and then turn your camera on and start flexing and pointing guns at people. Okay, you can't do that. And I think if people have to contribute something to get in first, they're not going to be inclined to do that sort of thing, because they'll realize, even if it's like a token sum, like $1, it still is like something to lose if they get kicked. So it incentivizes following the rules a little more. And yeah, Mercer literally has women knocking on his digital door. No, I wish. That was back in the Mamoon days. We had women knocking down our doors. Nowadays, we have guys pretending to be women knocking down our doors. That's what we have now. He's a late 40s guy, the guy who wrote the article. Oh, he's a boomer. He's a boomer. That's what it is. And by the way, just to be clear, anybody who already joined and I vetted them and they're behaving, that joined before I announced this most recent change to the rules, they're not getting kicked or anything. It's not retroactive. But it is, from now on, it's going to be subscribers only. Anyways, poor cells are supposed to get in before I change the rules. That's what poor cells are supposed to do. And Pencell donated $10. Thank you very much, Pencell. It's very, very kind of him. No message attached. Even better, I don't have to read and respond to something. It's just free Gibbs. Thank you very much. Anyways, we're going to read this. I'm going to go through it right now. And the whole article is, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I can just summarize. It's, because of the economic shift in AI, women are now in a weaker position, and you can see it with the media not being as anti-male. And I'm thinking that's just woke pulling back from its peak. Because if you guys remember peak woke, it was like the Floyd riots. And I remember, as a matter of fact, it's almost like I was talking to some other guys about this earlier yesterday. It's almost like if you look at Discord servers in our sphere, it's like if you look at the extinction layers in archaeology, you can tell when a mass extinction event happened, and you can do this with inky Discord servers too, where it's like you can see that they all started around 2021, 2022, because that's like the extinction layer when they wiped out all of our servers before that time. You know, it's like the earliest ones you can find are like early 2021, because that's right when woke started to get really bad, and it was like a buildup after the Manassian attack. It got really bad, and I guess they didn't have anything better to do during COVID than to start cracking down on us. But yeah. Anyways, let's read this here. Places that swallowed the digitalization stupidity will rapidly recover physical money, and generalized tax evasion being legally and meaningfully employed will become the exception. Oh, hey, I can get behind that because that's literally me right now. And employees' rights will become a joke. Sounds like Canada. Let me just skip a little bit down here. Be no generalized automated and autonomous trucks by 2035. That is true. Anybody who thinks that there's going to be automated trucking or whatever, all that has to happen is one accident involving an automated truck that kills people, and immediately everybody abandons the idea. Nobody wants to deal with that once it happens. It's going to cause a flight away. And it doesn't matter if it's rational or not. You can argue, like, you can make the argument about planes, for example, that planes are safer than automobiles, or like you're more likely to get struck by lightning than to crash a plane. Well, if you get enough plane crashes that happen and are publicized in the news, it causes a panic away from people flying planes. That's just how human psychology is. So all it's going to take is one of those events to happen, and that's it. We lose automated trucking. But that's only incidental to this, because he's arguing like women are 1.8% of plumbers, pipe fitters, steam fitters, carpenters, and machinists. And there will be automated doctors, automated secretaries, automated HR, and automated customer service. Okay, that's fine. That is correct. But the workforce doesn't work like this. And this is something I've discussed in previous streams as well, where when a technological innovation happens that increases productivity or efficiency in the market, and it causes a mass unemployment event, that causes people to then be pushed into these other sectors. It's not like there's suddenly going to be all of these plumbers and pipe fitter and steam fitter positions opening up for the people that would otherwise have been doctors and lawyers and whatever. Like, those positions are already starting to reach saturation point. Like, it's actually quite difficult to get apprenticed if you're in the trades. That's actually the choke point. And the the trades are actually incentivized against apprenticing people because they're effectively training their own competition. Why would they want to do that? There's actually an incentive against doing that. So that's to start with. And as a result, you end up with, if you want to get into the trades, you have to be apprenticed effectively by someone who you're friends with, like a good friend of yours or like a family member or something like that. And to this day, one of the biggest regrets I have personally is that I did not apprentice with my father, who was an electrician, air conditioning, refrigeration. He had a whole bunch of different trade tickets. I should have done that. I didn't. Anyways, though, like what's going to happen is these positions are just going to get swamped, and you're going to end up in the same situation that tech is in now, where tech has way too many potential employees for the amount of open positions available. Now, the causes are slightly different because there's a huge element of outsourcing with tech in the U.S. and other Western countries, but it's the same effect. It's a supply and demand thing. It's very simple. And ironically, here's something else that happened over the course of the past 30, 40 years in the trades. As like tech and these other education centered careers acquired front and center attention, especially by millennials, like where the emphasis became heavily focused on getting into college education and getting getting one of these white collar jobs that are comfortable in a air conditioned area, the average IQ of people that did go into trades actually went down, because like the 110 IQ people who would have been like the top 1/3 of tradespeople, like the 110, 115 IQ people, they instead became like average college educated paper shuffler types. And oftentimes they would even be like underemployed or unemployed in that field because there's no work for them. But the opportunity that they would have had they taken the trade route is now gone. You know, if they're in their mid 30s or something, they're not going to go back to trade school typically. So you ended up with like a decreasing IQ in these professions as time went on. And I remember my father would talk to me about this, where he would say that most of his work was fixing the F-ups of other people. Like people would just hire regular contractors. They would screw things up, and my father would have to go in. And that's where he made most of his money, was in fixing these mistakes. And it's kind of funny how that works. But the long-term consequence would just be these people that were originally employed in this white-collar industry, they're just going to get forced back into trades, but then that's going to displace the people that are maybe 105 IQ. You know, you're not actually getting you're not creating more jobs in these fields. And the impression is that this will give non-elite men some kind of advantage, and it's not. And another element that is just ignored by everybody. Now, this is something that I talk about, but oh, hang on a second. Hang on. I just realized that my live chat is not working correctly on my end. I'm going to reload it. Just give me a second here. Pop out. I was wondering why I wasn't getting updates on my chat. And I was like, damn, chat's really quiet today. Let me see here. Okay, now we're good. Let me see here. There are immigrant driver wrecks every day. No one cares about the immigrant drivers. Yeah, but that's because they're immigrants. There's a specific reason for them to intervene and prevent that from being known. And that's because of the agenda that they have regarding these immigrant groups, right? If they were white drivers or like whatever the local population is, let's say Japanese drivers in Japan, whatever, they would be talking about that as an issue. If there was a huge rise in crashes, they would be like, there's a competency crisis in this industry. They're deliberately ignoring it because of the demographics involved. But there's no reason to do that when it's an automated service. You know? So when it's an automated service, there's no victim group that could potentially be targeted. There's no reason to be afraid of offending anyone, or like there's no ethnic agenda that's being pursued. So I suspect that this would be there'd be a huge backlash as soon as you start seeing automated. People are already suspicious of it. They already understand intuitively, I think, that automation is a huge threat to just regular people. Like people that are on the supply and demand end. Like, okay, so there's two sections of the economy. There's the people that are subject to market forces and the people that are not subject to market forces. People that are not subject to market forces, these are the people who are in the strong positions. They're like the limited position. Typically, this is the capital owners. These are the people that have the investment money and that pay people's paychecks, business owners. Those are typically the people that are in the strong position, and the people that are employed, that are selling their labor, are in the weak position. They're the ones subject to market forces, right? That's us. And we understand that automation, it benefits these people because it increases their bottom line, because every employee that they don't have to pay is money that they've saved, right? So that's the logic that they have. And we understand that this hurts us. So there's already suspicion when it comes to automation. So I remember seeing this about Andrew Yang, and listen, I'm actually very pro Andrew Yang. I think that out of the Democrats, he's probably like the best Democrat, because I remember that there was this one situation, and just for context for non-Americans that are watching, including myself. I'm not American either. But Andrew Yang is a Democrat politician who has run for president, so he's at least ranking enough in the Democrat Party that he could run for the nomination. But he didn't get the message. He's like a typical rice cell type who does what he's supposed to do, but he doesn't realize that like you're supposed to read between the lines and be like an ethnic tribalist. But he was like genuinely thinking, okay, the Democrat Party represents the working class, so I should support the working class interests, right? Because I'm following what I'm supposed to do as a dutiful, conscientious politician. And it's like, no, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to be hostile to the white working class and like divide them based on race and get like a race class warfare system going so that the special interests that pay off the party can benefit from this. You're not, because what Andrew Yang would talk about is he would say like the white working class is like, as soon as I go up to them and talk about their issues, like automation is a threat, they're really open to hearing me out. But as soon as I say I'm a Democrat, they immediately get edgy and they don't want to talk to me anymore because they see the Democrats as their enemies. And he's like, this is a problem. And the Democrats actually shut him up on that. They were like, no, these people are our enemies, Andrew. Like, stop being logical. These are our ideological tribal enemies. Anyways, Andrew, and this is a long tangent, Andrew Yang talked about trucking specifically, that this is going to take a huge hit economically because it just makes more sense for logistics and trucking to be done through automation and not be done by these long distance truckers. And it's like, no, people want, like when you're driving on the road, you do not want to be driving next to a like several ton metal cage that's being remotely driven without any human judgment, right? That's just not, it doesn't matter how logical you are about it. People are just illogically going to oppose that. And they're going to find an excuse to get rid of it as soon as they can. This is why I'm glad to be a unionized government worker. Yeah, mogging us. I mean, this is, though, here's the downside to this. It doesn't matter if you're an individual, but from a society-wide level, the big problem you could run into is, like, this is what happened in Canada, where we have a public service that's large enough that they have these public unions that can then vote for their own bosses and use their political clout to force like their specific interests onto the party. So, for example, the Liberal Party in Canada is in power, and they are heavily financed and voted for in key ridings by the teachers union, the nurses union, like other public unions. And it becomes like a feedback loop where they demand benefits and gibs and expanding the public service, so hiring more of them in like useless roles. That increases their numbers. That means that their unions become stronger, and they're able to impose more and more demands. And then eventually you just end up with these public unions controlling the government. Like Canada, I think the U.S. is like 15% of its workforce is federal employees, and federal and state employees combined. In Canada, it's like 25%. It's completely ridiculous. And by the way, for people that are trying to understand why their governments are so unresponsive and like anti their own people, I'm talking like the UK, France, Canada, Australia. It's because of these unions being so tightly bound up with the government. Like, they're the ones in Anglo countries outside the U.S., they're the ones that set the rules. They're the ones that set the agenda. We can't get anything done without these fucking public unions destroying us politically and economically. It's pretty terrible. Do you think it's realistic for most young white men to leave for Asia and South America, or will these avenues be caught up in the future and many expats remigrated? You know, Grey Pill, I was a little bit, I was a little bit too early in my assessment that the situation in Asia was going to be devastating economically, because we have guys on the ground, And it looks like Iran has, and this is something else I'm going to get into, Iran has been a lot more pragmatic with how they've dealt with the Strait. They haven't just chimped out and shut it all down. They've been cutting deals, I think, to lift sanctions on an individual level in exchange for access to the Strait of Hormuz. And you're seeing people like the pro-American Israeli OSINT people are saying, look at the Strait of Hormuz, there's increased traffic. And it's like, yeah, that's because Iran's cutting individual. The way that Iran is going to do this is they are going to, because they know that they can't trust the U.S. to not reimpose sanctions as soon as they have the opportunity. Like, you cannot trust the Americans in any dealings or agreements whatsoever. Okay? So their understanding is, we can actually use the Strait of Hormuz, access to it, and not just to Iranian oil, but also to Saudi oil, Kuwaiti oil, Emirati oil, Qatari oil. If you want to get this oil transiting to your country, you have to lift sanctions off Iran, or else we're not letting your tankers cross the strait. That's the deal that they're going to make. That's how they're going to keep the sanctions off. And it's going to create a really perverse incentive, which I'm going to get back into. But anyways, we have guys on the ground in the Philippines and in Thailand. And yes, gas prices have gone up and it's getting worse. Like the economic situation is looking more precarious, but it's not nearly as bad as we thought. Like, life is still continuing as normal. I think if the war goes on for another couple months, you're going to start seeing some real problems in Southeast Asia. But as of right now, things are okay. But here's the problem, though. If Iran does this, and this would be the rational thing for them to do, is to, it's like, see, I wanted to, I had an impulse to create my my thumbnail for this stream as a toll paid. Like, you guys have seen the toll paid memes where they have like the Pepe driving the toll paid and then the angry white woman with the black eye. I was sort of gonna make a modified version of that and stick a turban on the guy driving, but I thought maybe that was a little too edgy. But that's what Iran's gonna do, is they're gonna be hanging toll paid signs all over these European countries and these other countries that want to get access to their oil and gas. But what this would mean is Israel and America would have to accept, and I think they've already priced in, that they're going to lose access to the Gulf. They're not going to be able to control it anymore. Iran will be able to control it and use the Gulf to lift sanctions. And the proof of this is that story that came out about how Israel is moving all the U.S. bases from the Gulf. Well, we don't know that this is what they're doing, but this is the logical reason. They're building a U.S. base in Israel, okay? If you understand what is going on with U.S. bases and like how the American soldiers behave in these bases, nobody wants U.S. bases, all right? Because like the mutt soldiers will just run around raping and marauding and harassing the local women. They're a problem, okay? The only reason the Israelis would tolerate this, because like you impose U.S. bases on your vassals, okay? You don't take U.S. bases yourself. You make the Goyim take the bases. So if they're building a base in their own country, that tells me that they're expecting to lose all the other bases, okay? And if they're pricing that in, which I believe they are doing with this building of a U.S. base in Israel, the incentive then becomes, okay, well, we know that Iran is going to leverage the strait to keep the sanctions off and to maximize the revenue. If we lose the strait, our incentive structure, at least from the Israeli point of view, is we need to destroy as much of their energy infrastructure as possible. And by they, I don't mean Iran. I mean the Gulf states. They're going to try and blow as much of these Gulf state refineries and energy hubs and like anything that desalination plants, whatever they can get their hands on, they're going to blow it up. Or they're going to attack Iranian facilities and provoke Iran to reciprocally blow up their oil and gas. And if they do that, we're going to see an energy crisis in Asia in particular that's going to be unprecedented. Because, the U.S. soldier in some kind of ditch. Yeah, Israel isn't letting the goys in their bunkers. That's true. That's plausible. I don't know if that specific story is true, but we do know that they don't let non-Israelis in bunkers. Like the foreign workers, Filipinos, Thais, etc., that are working there, or Indians, they're not being allowed to go in the bunkers. So, it's God's chosen people only. I don't know if they would do that with the U.S. I mean, the thing is, they're in the driver's seat. And if they do what I think they're going to do, which is attack the energy infrastructure in the Gulf and blow it up, Asia is going to get really fucked badly. Because the Gulf energy exports are not distributed evenly to different countries, okay? Like they're distributed primarily to Asian countries. And for example, Europe, the European exports from the Gulf are only about 15%. Whereas for China, it's like 50%. For Japan, it's 85%, or some huge number like that. And that range is pretty typical for Asia. Okay? And the U.S. would probably conclude at that point that, well, we're going to lose the Gulf and all that control of that energy. We might as well blow it up. I don't think the Americans would actually do it directly, but the Israelis certainly would. And the Israelis are the ones who decide policy. Like Trump would not want that to happen, but Trump doesn't have any control over anything. Trump, it's pretty clear that there was just an example of an attack of an alleged Iranian negotiator that was going to meet with J.D. Vance. He just got blew up by Israel. Like they don't care. They're just going to keep doing it. Let me see here. Oh yeah, the back to the Stone Age. That's very symbolic. I mean, what do they mean by that? And because Iran has said, first of all, you have to understand, Iranian, and it should be obvious by now. Like you guys have probably seen the COPE graph of like the COPE missile and drone launches going down, and so that means that they're running out of launch locations. We're blowing them all up. It's like no, they're slowing the pace down because they've saturated the anti-air defense. That's the reason why. But their missile launch sites and drone launch sites are all located in highly secure locations. Like you can't just blow them up. Okay? But obviously Iran's civilian infrastructure and civilian population is all above ground. That's what they're going to target because they have no alternative. They have no one else to target. They can't because they don't have the ordnance to blow up these underground mountain facilities where the actual military infrastructure is stored. So, yeah. I saw British people on Twitter looking at missile range map and unironically begging Iran to bomb us because their infrastructure is so shit. That's true. Actually, I was just thinking about how if we did have an attack on like a nuclear apocalypse on European cities, wouldn't that actually shift the demographics to be like 1950s? Because if you think about it, like all the recent arrivals are all in the cities. Like, wouldn't that actually be... You're kind of giving us a perverse incentive here when it comes to nuclear war. Will the U.S. take Gulf oil just like Iraq? Well, I don't think they took Iraq's Gulf oil. Because they had access to Iraq's Gulf oil under Saddam. Saddam was an American ally. So I'm not convinced that there's really a plan here. I think they just want to destroy access to it. Because they know that if they can't prevent Iran from benefiting from this material, the next logical step is just to make it as unprofitable as possible. So... What's this? Since you have taken up the subject of the Romanian article, within it also says rural America is more misandrous than urban America. Yeah, that sounds about right. America and these other former colonial countries, I would include Canada here and Australia and New Zealand, you have to understand we did not get founded the way that Latin American countries were founded. Like the way Latin America was created, it was mostly men, like fighting age men, that migrated into the New World and interbred with the local women, which there were plenty, because there were large populations that the Spanish and Portuguese conquered. Okay, in the northern part of North America, there was hardly any. Like, there's this theory of what was it? There's this theory that, like, the Americans and Canadians, we just sort of blew our way through the tribal people in our countries and conquered them and ruled over them the same way the Spaniards did. But it's like, no, actually, as a matter of fact, there was very, very few tribal populations here. And as a result, it was mostly men that were in our colonies. The men were just, and we actually had in the French colony, they were called the filles du roi. They were like these destitute women that were rounded up by the French government and shipped off to Canada just to marry off the local colonists because there were so few women. And I think that actually that scarcity of women provoked a cultural change that made the former colonial Anglo countries almost like structurally anti-male in some ways. Like, it's, you only find in the Anglo countries laws that are, for example, the Anglo countries in Scandinavia. Scandinavia is another exception, where you have like laws that say that prostitutes can sell their services, but the Johns get arrested if they buy it. You know, you also see like the age of consent laws in America. I think it's like 19 or something for age of consent, whereas in Europe it's like 16. And of course, that's a good thing. We're not saying age of consent should actually be up to. We should make it 35. You're not a legal adult until you're 35. And it's also like they made the age of consent for alcohol 21. I think that has a relationship. And the oil fields in Iran are close to Karg Island. Trump goes into Karg Island, not far away are the oil fields. Well, no, but they're not going to get in there. Because Karg Island is, you have to transit the Strait of Hormuz to get access to Karg Island. They won't be able to do that. They also have to cross through the entire Iranian coastline in order to access Karg Island. They're not going to be able to do that. They, like, the amount of casualties they would take would just be intolerable. And then let's say, hypothetically, let's say that they take the island. Okay, all the Iranians would have to do is saturate that island with missiles and drones and just annihilate everyone on it. Just, what are they going to do? You know, they don't have a logistics supply line. Like, they don't have a defensible supply line. Like, they don't have... The concept of air superiority doesn't exist anymore, because air superiority, the original idea was you control the skies so enemy fighters can't attack your land-based units, and therefore your land-based units are invulnerable while their land-based units are under constant attack. Well, now with drones and missiles that can bypass and outpace fighter jets, there's no such thing anymore. There's no such thing as proper air superiority, because they can just blow you up with these, what are they, FEV drones? So, yeah. I mean, and you know, it's so weird that escorts are illegal in Anglo countries. Here, red light districts are common. And you see, here's the thing. I can't really say I'm necessarily pro-prostitution either. Like, I think that there's having known guys who have gotten addicted to that way of doing things in Australia. Like, there are problems with it on the male side that I think a lot of guys underestimate. So I won't necessarily say that I'm pro-prostitution per se. But at the same time, it's like the Anglo countries are unique in how rigorous we punish it. And it's like, how do you come up with the logic behind this? And it's because I think women have always been in a relatively strong position in the former colonies, and they've been able to impose their interests. I need to order fish and chips in the next 20 minutes. Well, there is no topic for today's topic. So actually, there is something I wanted to go through. Let me see here. Here we are. This guy, Scott Ritter. So this guy has been predicting, if you guys have been following the Russia-Ukraine war, the idea is that Russia, as soon as the war started, oh, hang on. Who is Afternoth's son? Let's see here. There we go. Hidden. Okay, anyways. He was predicting that the Russians were going to overrun Ukraine from, like, day one. Yeah. Sorry, Efferneficent. I'm sure you're a nice guy, but we're not going to be taking lectures from anyone. This guy has been predicting that Russia is going to overrun Ukraine every day now for the last 4 years, and obviously it hasn't happened. But he had this interesting take because he's coming at the situation from a pro-America point of view and like an anti-nuclear proliferation point of view with Iran. And he had some weird arguments to make because this Nima guy was saying, well, Iran's going to keep its nuclear material, which it is. But there's no reason for them to surrender it now because they would lose leverage. And Scott is like, oh, well, actually, we can just get guarantees, and therefore we need to get rid of the nuclear material. And if you don't, well, here, I'll just play it. Hold on.
And my advice to the president would be, do whatever you can to get that deal back on the table. Whatever it takes, to include getting the hell out of the Middle East. Tell the Iranians, we're going to get the hell out of the Middle East, but you got to turn over that 450 kilograms of uranium hexafluoride. Enriched 60% enriched, 60%. And this is where the Russians can come in. The Russians can do this stuff, lifting of sanctions and things of that nature. I think the Iranians would give it up. It's caused them nothing but trouble, caused them nothing but problems. And what I would tell the Iranians is, we'll leave the bases. And we'll work with the Israelis to, change behavior. But we need you to, that deal that was on the table, we need you to do that deal. You're closing the door forever on your potential of developing nuclear weapons. That's just the way it is. You're going to sign a deal that says you will never be able to build nuclear weapons. You will be permanently limited to 3.75% enriched uranium, carefully safeguarded, etc. That's it. And I think Iran would do it, but not with the Americans dictating.
I really don't think that they're going to do it.
Well,
those days are gone. In my opinion, those days are gone.
I don't think so.
To understand what's going on in Iran right now.
I mean, I know full well what's going on in Iran, and I know that the Iranian people have said they will rip the president apart if he negotiates with the United States. Okay, but now the Russians come in. And if the Russians sit down with you and go, okay, stupid people, because you are stupid right now, you're being destroyed. Yeah, you're tough. You're really tough. We're really impressed. God, I'm so impressed how tough you are. But you say you care about your people. They're about to do permanent damage to your infrastructure. Permanent damage to your infrastructure. Yeah. You will never recover from this, ever. All right? So now you can say there, oh, God, we're the Shia. Oh, yay, we're so good. Karbala, 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 Karbala. Wow, that's stupid. How about lifting sanctions? How about getting the sanctions lifted, getting you fully engaged?
They don't want it anymore, Scott. The main problem.
Of course they want it.
They need it. Yeah, I know.
No, they don't need it.
The priority is not the sanctions right now. The priority has changed because they're talking about Israel. They know the second option. They know
what's their priority about Israel.
Yeah, Israel should be denuclearized.
Should be what? Destroyed? Yeah. Iran doesn't get to make that decision.
Yeah, but Israel, right now, the problem is Israel, Scott. As long as Israel has nukes, these nuclear weapons.
Lima, this is fantasy. This is cocaine-sniffing fantasy. If you think Iran has the leverage to get Israel to give up its nuclear weapons like that, you're hiring a guy. You know how Israel will give up its nuclear weapons? On Iran. That's how they give them up.
This is not my point. This is not my point that forcing Israel. This is that as long as Israel keeps up with his nukes on its soil and is talking about Samson option, there is no way to have some sort of balance.
All right, what's interesting about this is he says, oh, if Iran doesn't make a deal, they're going to have permanent infrastructure destruction. I'm like, wait a minute. So wasn't Europe completely annihilated after World War II? they completely destroyed Europe. Like, it was flattened. Like, the entire continent was reduced to rubble and ruins. Every city was destroyed. Like, I'm talking like Germany. Within 20 years? Less than that? They had cleared all the rubble. Everything had kick-started back, and the infrastructure was rebuilt. Why are they implying, like, first of all, there's no way that they could inflict any kind of infrastructure damage on the scale of what the Allied powers did to Germany in World War II. There's no way. They're not capable of doing it, first of all. And second of all, even if they were, if you consider that the Chinese are going to be heavily invested in wanting to get the Gulf kick-started back as fast as possible, they're going to have technology that like mid-20th century Americans and Europeans didn't have. It's not going to take as long to reconstruct Iran as it took to reconstruct Europe. So this is a very strange argument that he's making. But it's like, why would anybody trust the Russians to, like, Putin to make any deal? Like, if you look at what Putin has accomplished in Russia, he's managed to get his country bogged down in a permanent quagmire with Ukraine. He's lost the only way that Russia could have contested America, which is through allying with Europe and breaking Europe off. He's lost that. Now, the Europeans have also, like, European countries are just occupied slave states. They're just complete, like, clown show countries. They're not serious countries, but still, the Russians played along with it. They were baited into that war with Ukraine, and the Ukrainians, like, while this guy is talking about how the Russians are the saviors here and they have this strong position to negotiate, like, as this was happening, Ukraine was hitting Russia's oil and gas facilities and blowing them up. Like, it's hilarious. Like, what universe do these people live in? It's absurd. But yeah, no. So if anything, I think it's the other way around. I think that what Iran has demonstrated is, like, how impotent Russia is under Putin, and how like this sort of weak, cowardly way of dealing with the Americans and constantly negotiating or whatever. Like, that's how you lose. Okay, you win by firing missiles in every direction and hitting every mutt base that you can get your hands on. Right? That's how you win. Okay. But anyways, that's, again, this is like politics coping. And if you guys remember, I'll see if I can find that. I used it as a thumbnail in one of my videos, where it's like this 4chan post. I gotta find it in here somewhere. It's like everyone who's getting involved in politics or, like, getting really invested in politics is coping because they can't get laid. I mean, it really is that simple, if we're being completely honest. Okay. It is in here. Let's see here. I thought I had it in here. Oh, well, you guys know which one I'm talking about. It's where he says, like, politics is just a cope for not getting laid. It is. That's just a fact. All right? But still, it's fun, Like, it is still an objective fact that we're not getting laid, right? So politics coping is a way of dealing with that. Even if we know on a meta level that it's cope, it's still fun cope. Anyways, another thing I wanted to get into that I talked about briefly in the beginning is the woman shortage that's coming. And I'm going to pull up just a second here. Let's see here. Let's pull up the birth rate decline globally. Let's see here. Right. We're seeing around the world, we're seeing this rapid slump in birth rates. And it's hitting everywhere, but in particular, it's hitting the developing world. And we had some guys that were talking about Asia and Latin America. Asia and Latin America have been able to absorb to some extent some excess men that have managed to escape, which, some of you are, I've interacted with you and it's working out. You got out, well, the going is still good. But the effects of these birth rate lags, they take time to set in. And the population decline that's happening now, if you see the birth rate decline, especially here, like most recently, these are going to be people that turn 20 in about 10 years' time from now. Okay? And China is another good example of this. And, you came in late. Well, I'm just blackpilling about birth rates. So the issue that has affected Western countries is this excess of single men due to the shape of the population pyramid, as I've discussed before. When you have an upside down population pyramid and you don't have like really permanent fixed marriages, and you have just the natural age gap between a man and a woman, which is even just a couple of years, it doesn't have to be very much. Just because it's an upside down pyramid, you eventually get a pileup of men as you go further down the population pyramid of single men relative to single women that they would be competing for. We've been able to absorb that to some extent through immigration. We brought in people. Now, Europe has brought in mostly men of like fighting age. So that's actually it's actually backfired in Europe. It's been the exact opposite of what they wanted. But America, for example, America's brought in a lot of Hispanics, and the Hispanics, regardless of it's not that they're only bringing women in, but the fact that they bring men and women in, this lowers the overall age of the population, and the Hispanics can absorb some of these excess single men to some extent, which is why I think the issue hasn't. You've seen a lot of guys sort of outsource their singleness, their inceldom, to like Latin Americans. But what happens when those countries have the same demographic problem? Like Mexico's birth rate, I believe, is now below the birth rate of Hispanics in the U.S. What do you do now? And I believe the birth rate crossed into below replacement level. I believe that happened in like 2018 or so, 2019. So you still have about 10, 15 years before you start feeling the effects of this. But that gives you a timeline. It gives you a time limit as to when the competition will increase. So you combine that with the economic issue that's happening now, and I would say the window is rapidly closing for being able to outsource yourself to escape the dating crisis that's happening. Even Muslim countries are having this problem, though. It's I think the Muslim world will still be able to absorb. Well, I mean, they're their self-contained unit, right? Like you can't really enter. They don't have like non-traditional relationships, really. I mean, I know it's becoming more liberal in Muslim countries, but it's still not the norm. And, they don't allow, like, non-Muslim men to just show up and interact with their women. So, in some ways, they actually are in a much more advantageous position than we are. But we'll have to see. Let me see. I'm not surprised it's happening in the Middle East. Life is shit there. Yeah, that is true. And ironically, this is one of the upsides to shitty life and like no access to contraception and healthcare is that keeps the birth rates up for a period of time at least. So at least you don't have to worry about running out of people. This Marshall Plan helped us tremendously. America could do it again in Iran. Well, yeah, but China could do their own version of Marshall Plan. And unlike America, where it was like they didn't really have a direct material incentive for it. They did it because they wanted to rebuild Europe in order to help against the Soviet Union in the Cold War. The Iranians and the Gulf states, they have their enormous reserves of oil and natural gas that China needs, like critically needs. So their priority is going to be getting these oil and gas fields online as quick as possible. So I don't think it's going to be like, I do think that Israel in particular is going to provoke Iran by blowing up their oil and gas facilities and energy facilities. Like they're going to try and provoke Iran into bombing the Gulf states into uninhabitability. Like that's their strategy because they want to destroy the Gulf states. But what do we got here? $1 from Daweed. Go east, young man. Yeah, I'm not so sure. There are guys on the ground that say that they're still able to do it, but I'm suspicious. I'm beginning to really wonder. Because here's the thing, okay? Let's say that you do go there. Like, we know guys that are there. If you don't have a remote job that you're employed at from your country of origin, like Europe or America, and you're having to find some work in those countries, typically it's going to be like English teaching or something. That's usually the only thing that's really open to foreigners. You're dependent at that point on their economy remaining functional enough that there's a demand for English language, which is still, it's not an essential, like it's a good asset to have for education. So people that want to further their kids' education will enroll them, but if there's an economic crisis, they're going to cut back on that. They're going to cut back on English tutoring. And then what do you do? What happens if you suddenly are out of a job and you're in Asia? Like, as I talked about in my streams with guys in Southeast Asia, these countries don't exist to make your life easier. Like the only reason Thailand and these other countries let expat men into their countries is because they see that you're either useful to them in some way or they can extract wealth out of you. And as soon as those two conditions are no longer met, they will want to get rid of you. They will get rid of you like a bad cold. And you have to be prepared for that. So, let me see here. They can take Karg Island easily. They've planned it for decades. Well, there was no plan going into this, though. Like, they didn't, if you look at what happens, or like how this war started, they just attacked without any preparations. If they wanted to take Karg Island, they would have already had at least like 20, 30,000 troops in position, and they would have already attacked. Within a few days of the initial strikes, they would have attacked, because that's the time to do it. That's when the element of surprise is still there. But they didn't do that. They attacked with their air force, and then Iran responded by bombing all the U.S. bases, blowing them out of commission. And now the U.S. is stuck. Like, have you guys seen the flight patterns that the U.S. bombers have to do, where they have to go around the entire peninsula of Europe? Like, they can't even fly over Europe because all of these European countries have closed their airspace to America. So they have to go from all the way around Spain and Italy and up France just to reach the launch point for their bombers in the UK because they can't get any closer. Like, I don't see any logistics or planning here at all. Like, this has been a total catastrophe from their point of view. I mean, it's par for the course, I suppose, with Mr. President Trump, but it's ironic because I think everyone else was expecting the situation to be a lot more planned out. Like I said in my previous stream where I focused a little more on Iran, it really seemed like when the attack first happened, everyone was like, okay, this is it. Like, they must have figured out that this is the time to strike, and Iran is like, it's never been this weak before. And Nick Fuentes in his stream came out and was like, it's over. Israel's going to dominate the Middle East. They're going to destroy everything. Iran's finished. Like, that was his first stream on the topic. Yeah. What's this Feltree Zed? I literally just went to Burma, which is as sea as it gets as a white guy, and got nothing. I don't believe in JBW anymore at all. That's a good point, actually. I'm skeptical of these just be XYZ theories. Like, they kind of strike me as get rich quick theories, like similar in how they're thought out. Though I think in Burma's case, like, how are you supposed to find a chick in Burma? Because here's the thing. This is when we talked to Ayebo, who was in Thailand, he described how these different Southeast Asian countries function. I don't know how Burma fits into this, but for example, he said Philippines was the most liberal, Vietnam was the most conservative, and Thailand is like in the middle. Probably, if I had to guess, I would say Burma/Myanmar is on the more traditional end. So most likely, you're going to have a hard time dating in a Western style. Like this is why he was saying, okay, the Philippines, it's easiest to date like an American in the Philippines, but it's also kind of run down and not great. It's pretty poor. Thailand is a little more conservative, but still it's kind of like Europe in some ways, like Eastern Europe. A little, like somewhat socially conservative, not too much though. And the infrastructure's good. Vietnam is very conservative. Like, I have reports from guys there that, like, you cannot, basically, if you do not have, like, PR and a very clear plan for, like, being married very shortly, you won't be considered a serious option by most of the women there. Because in those cultures, it's very much, like, strictly marriage only. I would have to assume that Myanmar would look a lot like Vietnam in that sense. Because there's no reason for them to... Like, they drove the Americans out the same way that the Vietnamese did. Not really in a war, but, like, they drove out American influence with Aung San Suu Kyi or whatever getting kicked out. So the local men are going to prefer socially conservative norms. I've seen many pale-skinned, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in the Middle East and North Africa, so I wonder what the ethnic European population there is. Well, North Africa had Europeans in it for its entire history, right? Like, even in the Roman Empire period, there was Latin colonies. And then after that, when the Muslim period began, there were raids across the European coastlines, even as far north as Iceland, and they used to just carry off people as slaves. And it's not like they would just allow the slaves to die off on their own without reproducing. Like, oftentimes the women would get sold as, like, well, you know, not exactly brides, but they were able to breed, I'll put it that way. They were able to reproduce. The men oftentimes were as well. Like, they wouldn't make it impossible. So there's actually more European ancestry in North Africa than there is North African ancestry in, like, Spain, for example, or southern Italy. So, y'all spending this time pondering over the future, sitting stuck doing nothing, why not take the opportunity to experience options abroad while you still can? Well, that's true. You know, I definitely wouldn't discourage that if you have the option. I would, in fact, say, my argument would be, the opportunity for this is starting to close. Especially with this war. This war is going to tighten everyone's belts. Like, even if it ends in the best way possible for energy markets, it's still going to put so much uncertainty in the system that, like, China and these other countries that are oil and gas dependent, they're going to be cautious economically. Like, they're not going to take any risks economically, which means things that would be considered relatively frivolous spending, they're going to be cutting back on. So you just got to be prepared for that. And let's see here. Oh, yeah, this is another one. See, I don't give financial advice, of course. We can't give financial advice, but it is interesting that it's been, 2 weeks since I started talking about the Iran war, and I was saying oil prices are going to keep going up. Like, they're going to talk down the price again and again, but it's going to spike again, and they have no way of preventing it from going up. And that's exactly what's happened. As soon as Trump gave his COPE speech, oil prices shot up like a rocket because it's like people just don't believe them anymore, and they realize they're pricing in for a long war. And the only way that this war ends, because again, the U.S. doesn't have any more military targets to hit. The only targets they have left are these civilian targets. Well, the civilian targets are going to be retaliated against. Like when the Iranians, when their civilian targets are struck, they're going to retaliate against the Gulf states, which are their immediate vicinity. And they're going to hit Israel too. But Israel is like, I don't know if you guys know this, but Israel's oil and gas supply is guaranteed by the U.S. So they get as much as they need from America. So they don't really, I wouldn't say they're completely insulated, but it doesn't matter as much what happens to their oil and gas supplies. And they have Turkey, they have access to Turkey anyways. And the Azerbaijani, their gas reserves pass through a pipeline that goes through Turkey. Turkey profits a lot from this. They're not going to end that supply. And anything that they lose from the Gulf getting blown up, they're just going to get supplied by America. So it's all in their incentive to blow things up. Yeah, gas prices in the Gulf increased 50%. Yeah, if I didn't know better, I would say that this is like a Canadian conspiracy to drive up gas prices. Sometimes it feels like that. Because we actually benefit a lot from this. Our oil and gas, oil, is locked up in basically like asphalt. And it's so expensive to refine that it's not really profitable to do it when prices are below $60 a barrel. Like prices like this are amazing for us. We can make a pretty penny off of this. It says our gas prices in the USA and Canada are completely rigged, especially the states have massive oil reserves. There's no reason for us to be paying extra other than global corpos price gouging us. Yeah, kind of. Here's the thing though, okay? The US dollar, the way the US dollar functions is that the US market is open to the world. The reason why, and I've used this analogy before where I compared Vietnam and Australia trading. Instead of them trading with their own currency, they swap their currency for US dollars and just trade each other US dollars. The reason why they do that is because all of these companies are under the expectation that they're eventually going to trade with the US. The US is the world's largest and wealthiest consumer market. And there's always a demand for US dollars, so it's always beneficial to sell to Americans because there's always this need for the global economy to have a constant outflow from the US into it of US dollars so that they can use it as a medium of exchange. When you shut down oil exports, which is what I think Trump is going to do, and it's because, and I'm not saying this is like an insult to you, buddy, but the average American is just not aware of this. They're ignorant of this, of the reason why the oil and gas that the U.S. produces is traded on the global market. It's not because the Americans are being charitable or because they want the oil companies to make tons of money. They're doing it because it's critical to maintain U.S. dollar hegemony. As soon as they end that, this provokes a huge crisis in the rest of the world because then every country is going to be incentivized to do this that produces oil and gas for itself. Because as soon as the U.S. shuts off their oil exports, Brent crude is located in the Eurozone. It's like it's the European gas fields in the North Atlantic Sea, but it generally reflects the global oil and gas price. Once they shut down the WTI crude, which is the American shale, once they shut down those exports, this is going to explode in price. It's going to go up to like 120, maybe even 130 a barrel. Who knows? And that means that every other country that produces oil and gas for itself, they're going to be forced to decide, do we continue to sell on the open market at these absurd prices and cause our local gas prices to skyrocket, or do we cut exports? so that we can keep our domestic prices low and avoid the government falling apart because of popular unrest. And that drives prices up even more. And then more countries see, then it goes up to like maybe $130 a barrel. And then these other countries are like, well, shit, we got to do the same thing because it's going to be like a race to shut down exports of oil and gas. That's the danger here. If the U.S. does this, it would collapse the global economy basically. And it would collapse the U.S. dollar as well, because there would be this would completely end the use of the U.S. dollar. You can't trust the Americans to keep markets open unless it benefits them, in which case there's a massive push then to find an alternative to the U.S. dollar and take that 10% trade hit or whatever it is. So I'm highly dubious that this would end well. But I think Trump would do it. I think he would, because he doesn't understand this either. They're just not aware of why they have these open markets the way they do. It's in order to maintain the dollar. And yeah, yo, I love your vids of downloaded black pill content. I appreciate that. There are some streams that I privated. They're not deleted. They're just privated because I was concerned about YouTube's censorship policies. And I'm thinking that I'm going to download them and I'm going to re-upload the streams onto a third platform like Rumble. So let me see. Is there some issues with live chat? I don't think so. My message now showing up. It's looking good to me. I think you're good. Are you sending a message, Anton? Just to be clear, if you guys want me to be guaranteed to see a message, send it to me on Super Chat. And I'll be able to see it. Because I have my Super Chat live feed right here. Anyways. Okay, that's good. Anyways, yeah, the Middle East... It's a mess, and it's ironic. All this could have been avoided. Just don't listen to the Israelis when they want you to blow something up. But that can't happen. It's funny because people are under the impression that Trump is blackmailed or something. I don't believe that. I think he genuinely just is loyal to these people. Men not helping women. Oh, yes. Okay. So this is another topic I can bring up, actually. I was going to make a video on it, but I just wasn't able to find sufficient content to justify it. If you guys remember the Shiloh Hendricks phenomenon, she had that, I think she was being mugged by a Somali, or she had something stolen from her by a Somali, and she called the Somali an N-word. And she never apologized for it either. And there was this huge explosion in support for her in the U.S. There was people dumping tons of money in her GoFundMe because she was unapologetic about it. And it made me realize something. Okay, there's the concept of a type 1 error and a type 2 error in statistics. Okay, a type 1 error is where if you're running an experiment and you're trying to determine if a hypothesis is true or not. And a type 1 error is where you assume that something is there, that the null hypothesis, which is that there's no relation between these two things, is you assume that it's false and that there's a relationship when there's none. So that's a type 1 error. A type 2 error is where you miss that there is a relationship between these two phenomena that you're studying, and the null hypothesis is false. But you don't see that, so you assume the null hypothesis is true. And you can actually apply this to psychology. So the null hypothesis in this context is that, say a woman is being harassed on a subway by a migrant, okay? The null hypothesis for the Daniel Penny types are that this woman who is of my background, she's on my side. She's going to support me in a public confrontation if I step up and intervene against this migrant that's harassing her. And that she like supports me and my worldview generally, like she sees herself as part of my team. That's the null hypothesis. Okay. There is if you intervene under that assumption and you're wrong, you'll end up in a situation where this woman will be able to backstab you publicly for social media points. You get thrown under the bus and potentially thrown in jail for acting in the defense of this woman. Okay, that's if the null hypothesis that you assumed is true, which is that she's on your side, turns out to not be true. And we've seen that happen in a few cases, and there's such an intense sensitivity to this now that the hostility you see among the alt-righters towards women in general, and like this extreme suspicion of women, is due to fear of making a type 2 error, where they assume that this woman's on their side, and then it's revealed that she's not, and it's either profoundly humiliating, and that's on the lower end of consequences, or you end up putting yourself in a politically compromising position, and you get backstabbed by this woman, and thrown in jail or whatever, because you assumed that she was on your side, but she's not. Whereas if you assume that she's not on your side and you don't defend her, and you just allow whatever's happening to happen, if you're wrong, it's unfortunate, but you don't lose personally, and it looks bad for the people that are supporting the migrants, right? If we're talking like if a woman gets, surprise snuggled in Europe by a migrant, it looks bad regardless of whether people intervene or not. So it's like, from a political point of view, you don't really lose anything from that. And then if it turns out that she supported the migrants, or she was like a leftist and she got attacked, it's sort of like, this is where you get these people that say, well, she voted for it. And you get this sort of smug satisfaction that you didn't fall for the bait, that this person who is not on your side, who's your enemy and opposes you, has been harmed by their own side and backstabbed by their own side. That's the logic. I'm not even making a value judgment about whether this should be the case or not, whether it's true or not, but this is the logic why whenever you see a woman getting attacked in Europe or in America or whatever, you see people say, well, she voted for it. First of all, it's generally a good assumption because it's usually true, if we're going to be honest, right? Maybe it's too far to say that it's usually true, but it's much more likely that a young woman is going to support the far left than a young man, okay? Or like an older woman is going to support the far left, right? In that sense, it's technically true that it's, if you're going to run the risk of defending a far leftist woman who hates you from a migrant, odds are defending a young woman, your odds are highest that that's going to be the case. So technically, this is correct. Whether you could say it's still morally justified or not, that's a different story, but that's the logic behind it. Yeah, statistics are an amazing thing, aren't they? And yeah, she touched the Somali kid, or she called the Somali kid the N-word. And to me, that's proof, by the way, the reaction to the Shiloh Hendricks fiasco, that proved to me that it's not that these people are anti-woman reflexively, because there's this tendency to conflate the far-right politics people with being inkies, just as a default, and that's not really true, strictly speaking. The fact that Shiloh Hendricks, she received unanimous support, and what was interesting was there was a campaign on X when that fiasco happened to smear her as like low class, which she was. If we're being honest, she had a whole bunch of tattoos, and I don't know if she was married to the guy that she had a kid with, but the thing is, the kid was white, and her partner, partner, as they say in the UK, her partner was white. So I don't know if she's not UK, but it's just whenever I think of unmarried couples with children, I think of the UK. Anyways, because the guy that she had a kid with was white and she was white, that was sufficient for the white nationalist crowd to open their wallets and support her. And all of the attempts to attack her for being like low class or whatever, having tattoos, being non-trad, all that just completely collapsed. Nobody cared. As soon as they saw that she proved undeniably that she was on the right side of that friend-enemy distinction that I described, and that there was no way that you would make a type 2 error by supporting her, they piled in to support her. So make of that what you will. And this is also why I said, like, I don't think that you're, like, the idea that you're going to see a pro-male far right, I just don't think that that's going to happen in the long run. I think it's much more likely that the far right is going to incorporate several elements of feminism in order to appeal to women. And I think you're already seeing it in Europe. Like, I think that's much more likely than them attempting to appeal to inkies on the far right. Because, I mean, they're already structurally hostile to inkies because they view us, because of their ideology being, like, functionally elitist, like, as a structurally elitist. You know, they're very much Nietzschean, you know, might makes right type of people. Well, you can't be an inky and support that sort of thinking. As a matter of fact, I would say that inkies, in a lot of ways, were kind of more Christian traditionally in a weird way than anything else. Because it's like, if you think of how inky culture works, it sort of reminds me of how monk societies worked in the Middle Ages. Because the way that monks would operate in these monasteries, it's like you would try and emphasize how humble you are and how low and unambitious, and like you would try to reduce these traits as much as possible. For example, Saint Paul, he was always being described as like this ugly dwarf. I'm not even joking. Like he would be described physically as being ugly and being really short. And the purpose behind that was to, and most likely that wasn't the case, by the way, because he was from like a wealthy family. Probably, if anything, he was better looking than the average person at the time. But the reason he was being described that way is because being so humble, it's because of the way that Christianity works. It ascribed like positive moral characteristics to him, to be like the lowest among the low, you know? And you see a similar thing in inky culture, where it's like it's almost like inverted, where the more worldly, desirable in a worldly sense you are, like the less people respect you or appreciate you. So in a way, it's kind of the opposite of the right wing as it's developed now, right? Inkies are I'm trying to avoid using the I word because we still don't know how temperamental YouTube is for the censorship, but use your imagination what you think I mean by inky. Inkel, ink. So let me just read a little bit here. Why the hell would they even support it if it means them being harmed? No self-preservation instincts. Well, I think in a lot of cases, they just don't really think about it, Like, because you have to remember, the rate of, like, assault on women in European countries and elsewhere has gone up a lot, but it's not like every single European woman is getting attacked, right? It still is relatively rare. It's not like it's going to happen to the average person, but it's like it might go from 1 in 1,000 women to like 1 in 200 women that gets attacked. That's still a 5 times increase, but it's not happening to every single woman. It's still like a small number of women that are getting attacked. So I think in a lot of cases, they just don't really realize it. Let me see here. Gavin Newsom is leaning into this. Mark my words on this, by the way. The way that this is going to evolve in American politics, regardless of how this war ends, the America First crowd is going to tear the Republican Party apart from the inside. And they're going to reconstitute it as an America First, like an explicitly nationalist party. But this is going to drive out the establishment Republicans, and it's going to drive them into the Democrat Party, as a matter of fact. And what you're going to see by 2028, and you've already seen some whispering about this, Gavin Newsom has obviously made a very strong public appeal. He even when the Iran war started, Gavin Newsom was talking about how Zionism is a problem and we need to talk about our relationship with Israel. He's piped down on that lately, but it's very interesting to see that he saw an opportunity there. But they're talking about how they need to, in the Democrat Party, they need to nominate a white Christian man as their candidate. And that's, to me, that sounds like, who else is that going to be? It's either going to be Gavin Newsom or it's going to be Pete Buttigieg, who's like a butt pirate. I think highly unlikely because no black will vote for him. So it's probably going to be Gavin Newsom. And if I had to guess what they're going to do is they're going to, aesthetically, they're going to embrace like the 90s and 2000s vibes. Because remember, this coming election is going to be the first election that is majority millennial, or like millennials will play a more important role than baby boomers in the election. This will be the first time in 2028. And millennials are very nostalgic about the 90s and about the 2000s, like younger millennials. For us, it's the 2000s. For older millennials, they're thinking about the 90s. And they have this vision of the 90s and 2000s that there was like no racial conflict in the U.S. Like everything was harmonious. It's like, what's that? Hey Arnold. If any of you have seen the Hey Arnold TV show on Nickelodeon back in the day. That's very emblematic of like 90s thinking, where they have like the token black kid is best buddies with the main character white kid. And everyone gets along on a racial level. It's like all the conflict is on a personal level. That's the way that millennials want the world to be. They want to go back to that vision of the world, even if it didn't really exist, and it didn't at the time. Like, because there was like the LA riots that happened, and various other conflicts that happened. So it was a fiction, but most likely what's going to happen is the Democrats are going to eject the progressives on their left, and they're going to shift rightwards for 2028. They're going to absorb the establishment Republicans, and they're going to put out these vibes of like, we're not woke anymore, but we're also not MAGA anymore, and we're returned to normalcy. We're going to do a return to the 90s, a return to the 2000s. That's what that's the vibes that Gavin Newsom is going to be pushing, or his campaign is going to be pushing. And that's going to sweep the board for them, I think. Now, that's what they should be doing if they're intelligent, because that's what everybody wants. Everybody just wants to go back to the 90s and the 2000s, right? And the ideological right wing, that's all esoteric racism, like people aren't really keen on that. It doesn't really go anywhere anyways. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that JD Vance, he attempted to appeal to like Xbox or whatever. He tried that as well. It didn't really work. Anyways, let me read up and see what I've missed here. Christianity is the only religion that actually vouches for inkies, as far as I know. Main reason the Christians are anti-polygamy isn't because it's a named sin, but because of 1 Corinthians 7:2. Yeah, I don't know enough about the topic to have a strong opinion either way, but I do see the parallels, culturally, I mean the parallels between Christianity and the inky phenomenon socially, I mean. And what I found most interesting about the inky phenomenon is there seems to be this where was I going with this? what I find most interesting about the inky phenomenon is the fake cells that are always trying to get in and trying to LARP. And you wonder psychologically, why are they doing this? Like, why would you want to be in our community pretending to be one of us when you're not? And then you realize, and I think this is something I talked about all the way back in the Mamoon days, is for a lot of these guys, it's like a pressure release valve, because everybody has to pretend that they're doing really well, right? Like, everybody has to pretend that things have never been better for them. They're always mogging. They're always getting the girl at the end of the day, whatever. Being able to be like, I suck and I'm a loser and I can't get what I want in life and I'm really depressed about it. Just being able to say that, even if it's strictly speaking not true, I think that that has a certain cathartic element to it. There's the ability to be able to not have that pressure on you, that you have to perform or you have to demonstrate some kind of like intrinsic value, especially when it comes to women, in order to be socially accepted. I think having that pressure taken off of you and just being accepted as who you are, even if you're like the lowest that you could be or whatever, I think that has a really powerful draw to it, even for normies. You know, because it's one of these weird phenomenons you try to explain, like, why are these guys in our community? And definitely I think it's something to do with that. It explicitly says women are to be silent in church and submission to the patriarch as always. Have a quiet spirit. Yeah, Paul was pretty based, wasn't he? What's this? Maybe they want to build an army or just grift. Who, are we talking to fake cells? Superiority complex. That is true. There are guys like that. Yeah, that's true. But I can tell you from back in the Mamoon days, we would find some really weird cases of guys that would have like these really elaborate campaigns to stay in our communities, even though they were not anything like us. And what you got the sense of was that they really enjoyed being able to like not have to pretend that they're slayers or they're chads or whatever. And if you take that away from them, they actually are bothered by it. Like, they actually want to stick around, even if they're fake cells. But there are some of them that do behave in a way that it's very obvious that they're getting off on flexing. And there was a couple of guys I had to boot because of that. I didn't like it either, because I didn't even dislike them personally, but they were just behaving in a way that was very unfriendly. Not nice. It is interesting, though, that there's all these black pill normies now, and they're sort of homeless. They can't really go on normal discords because you can't tell a black pill normie from a non-black pill normie. It's almost like being a member of a banned political party or something, where you have to be very careful who you reveal that to, because if you get caught supporting that party, you could get arrested. That's kind of like how normies are in their normie spheres if they're BP'd. And I'm thinking more like the clavicular kinds, right? And speaking of clavicular, actually, this is something I wanted to bring up to Face and LMS, because Face and LMS is still around. He just doesn't do public content anymore. But I would really love to interview him and ask him about, like, 5 years on from the BP. Or from What Attracts Women, I should say. 5 years on from What Attracts Women. Obviously, he didn't invent the BP, but he popularized it. It's like, now we have clavicular running around. Yeah, I know everybody hates him because he's like an autistic. He's like a PSL chatbot. Somebody fed PSL into a chatbot and it spits out clavicular. But the fact that he's being tolerated and like normies are actually, like, they're not completely rejecting him. They're sort of listening to him on some level. That, I think, is a signal that they're not rejecting the ideas underlying the BP. They're just they might find it kind of ridiculous and outlandish, but they're not. It's like the immune system isn't rejecting it. Yeah, exactly. Hang on one second here. Okay. Yeah. Dude, everybody wants to see Face and LMS. Unfortunately, he's not a fan of streaming, actually, generally, I don't think. He's just not really a extroverted guy, I don't think. I haven't really talked to him about it, but the impression I get, he's not that extroverted, and it takes a lot of energy out of him to do streams. But man, if we could get him on a stream just as an interview, just, back and forth some questions, it would be amazing. Because it's been a wild 5 years if you've been following the sphere. Nero says they are rejecting the person speaking. You are correct. That's true. They don't like people don't like arrogance and like the way that he's acting. But that doesn't mean that he's wrong. They just don't like the message. Let's see here. It's a good-looking kid. That's why it's spreading in mainstream data, unlike us. It is kind of crazy because the impression I get from Clavicular is he's like autistic. He doesn't really have a good social sense, but it seems like he's deliberately doing things to see how much he can get away with before his face card gets declined, That seems to be because he just recently got in trouble for shooting an alligator or something. I haven't been following it closely. I mean, to be quite honest with you, I'm not that interested in Clavicular's fiascos and his latest antics. It's not really my interest, but still. Freaks like Kefals make weirdos like Clavicular seem okay. Yeah, that's true. Fair point. Yeah, spent my nights watching LMS and Cellmatics live streams. Yeah, you're right. Those were the best days. It was awesome. I remember just sitting on Discord, occasionally getting into the call-ins, and then on the off time, you watch everything getting burned down during the Floyd riots. Those were the days. Yeah, I was thinking of doing something on the Floyd riots. Might be a little bit late, but I was going through the old footage of, because I saved a whole bunch of the footage from those riots. And it was really fascinating how, if you just look at what was happening, people were wandering around, like women were wandering around with their phones, just sort of absent-mindedly, slightly bored, recording the rioting happening. And all the guys were the ones going crazy and burning shit down and attacking things, attacking people. And you could tell they were doing it just to try and provoke attention from the women that were wandering around. It was kind of like, it kind of reminded me of, if you ever seen those videos of peacocks doing their displays, and then the peahens are just sort of looking at them and absent-mindedly, half-heartedly judging them. That's kind of what it felt like when I was looking at the old footage. Are you going to get back to the Romanian article or not? Are you talking about the... well, there's not much else to say about it, really. I mean, it's... Okay, AI is going to eliminate a lot of jobs, yes. Blue-collar industries are not going to compensate by growing. That's not how it works, unfortunately. I wish it was how it worked, but it's not. So, can you connect with LaMarcus Small? That would be so nice. Who is LaMarcus Small? I'll look him up. Just 1 second here. Marcus Small. Let's see. Okay, that guy. I don't think so. That looks like that could get me in trouble. I'll tell you what. If you wanna get me in touch with him personally, I could maybe do personal interactions. But anything involving self deletion, we cannot do anything on YouTube related to that. As a matter of fact, the first stream I did, it got nuked because we were joking about Saint Hamoudi no longer being with us because of self-deletion, as a joke. But that was enough to get the stream taken down. And nobody was even typing anything. It was just me saying it, saying the S word. That nuked the stream. They're very concerned about that sort of thing. Declining birth rates are universal now, even in low-income countries, because of internet and basic safety. Internet's a big one. You know, I think one of the major elements is people are able to see online what the standard of living is in other countries, and they do like a negative comparison. And they're like, well, I can see these Americans and these Europeans, they have all this infrastructure and like this modern lifestyles where it's like there's abundance of food and everything's nice and clean, and like they have like access to cheap technology. Why should I bring children into the world and lower my standard of living when I want to live more like these people? And by this, I'm talking like people in the poorer parts of Latin America or in Southeast Asia. Like that's how they're thinking about it. Remember that white protester who got his girl stolen by Tyrone? No, I don't, but that sounds pretty funny. It wouldn't surprise me, actually. It's like, what a shock that this protest that involves weird quasi-religious ceremonies where black people are getting like their feet kissed and massaged by white people in like this supplicating fashion will result in Tyrone stealing your girl. It's like, what a shock. Oh, Cute Dweeb tipped $20. Thank you very much, Cute Dweeb. Let's see here. Hi, Mercer, I support you. Well, thank you very much. If you want to join my Discord in the description, you can. If you can just show that this was your donation, you can get right in there. And as a matter of fact, if you donate or send a super chat for $20 or more, or accumulatively $20 or more, so like if over the course of several streams you were to send like $5, $5, $5, $5, you then get a custom roll with your own name on it and color. See, I am actually learning to shill quite effectively. How much success with women do you need to be considered a fake sell? That's a very good question. This was actually a conversation that we had on Discord, our public call on Discord, where it was like, okay, I was saying that my server is a BP server. It's not strictly speaking an Inky server, okay? Like you don't have to be an Inky to get in. But we were like, okay, at what point do we say someone is a fake sell? The way I consider it, here, I'll actually pull this graphic up. And I used this graphic before, actually, as well. Let me see here. Just got to find it here. And it's the amount of snuggles that has been going on, and snugglelessness rate. Let me see here. Here we are. So this is, I brought this up a little while ago in one of my streams, and it's really funny. This guy's, Gen Z is fine. People are dating and getting married. You're just a terminally online loser. And then you look at the snugglelessness rate from 1982 to 2023. And I looked into this, by the way, just to make sure. These are not cumulative. And by that I mean, or rather, excuse me, they are cumulative. By that I mean, so somebody who has had no snuggles ever does not also qualify for having no snuggles in the last year or no snuggles in the last 3 months. Like these are separate categories. So a person that had snuggles in the last 3 months, or no, had no snuggles in the last 3 months, but had snuggles within a year of this survey would be qualified in no snuggles in the last 3 months, but would not qualify for no snuggles in the last year. So this is cumulative, which means, okay, so for men aged 22 to 34, which, by the way, another thing to consider, this 22 to 34 is actually a further along in terms of age than the typical studies that measure this. Most studies go from like 18 to 30 for young men, right? This is 22 to 34, and it shows that 10% of men, no snuggles ever. That means complete inks, okay? And 22, why I really love this is because 22 is when most guys are done college. Because you finish high school at 18 and then you go to college for 4 years typically, and you're done by 22 if you go straight to college, okay? And that's most guys will do their bachelor's. They don't go back for a master's. And this is your prime time to find a partner, is when you are in high school and when you're in college. That's when the numbers favor you. That's when the gender ratio of men to women that are single is either at parity or actually gives you an advantage as a man, okay? Once you're out into the workforce, especially if you're a stem cell, which most of you are, you're going to be in a sausage fest, all right? So this is actually, by the time you're 22, if you haven't gotten anything at all, that's usually, it's going to get harder from that point on. I don't want to say it's going to be impossible, because that's too blackpilling, but it gets a lot more difficult after you leave college, okay? This is one reason why I like this study. And another, as I said, is that these are separate. So these are actually, you can add them together to get the total number. So 10% of men are total inks in 2022, and 24% of men are inks, have had no snuggles in the last year. So that means it's been at minimum a year since they've had snuggles, a year or longer, remember, because it would, it's not saying a year or more, but that's effectively what they mean, because there's no other category. And then no snuggles in the last 3 months means it's been, the last time that they've had snuggles has been either 3 months to a year from when this survey was done. That's like the singleness rate, if you think about it. So it's 24%, no snuggles in the last year, 10% no snuggles ever. So that's already 1 in 3 men are in hot water here. It means that they have not had any snuggle success in the prime of their lives in an entire year or longer. Okay, and then no snuggles in the last 3 months. These are guys that they might not be inkies in terms of not being able to get any, they're able to get like some attention from women, but it's very inconsistent. If you haven't had snuggles in 3 months, that's considered by like millennial standards, by millennials who grew up in the 2000s and 2010s, that would be considered an extended dry spell for them, not being able to get anything in 3 months. And that's already, on its own, that's 35% of men. Okay, so we have 34% that are either a year or longer or have not had anything at all. And then 35% that have not had anything in the last 3 months. Combined, that's almost 70% of men. Almost 70% of men are either not in a relationship and have not had any female attention for 3 months or longer. Right? And half of those guys have not had female attention for a year or longer. Okay? So the situation is quite bad. But again, the guys who have not had anything ever, that's only 10%. So it's like, okay, for the conversations that we're having, are we going to exclude 90% of men because they haven't had anything? We're only allowing people that have had nothing at all. So we're going to exclude this other 2/3 of men that are experiencing a very similar issue? Or are we going to allow the conversation to be through this entire subgroup of men in a more general sense? You know, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any inky spaces, right? I'm just saying that there should be, we should have like a broader forum to talk about this, because this is a 70% issue for young men. 70% of men, okay, are having this crisis basically. And this is interesting because it's approximately the same amount of men that are single, if you think about it. If you guys remember that relative singleness chart between young men and young women, it's remarkable how similar that is to the celibacy rate. Oh, and it looks like I got a... Hang on a second here. I got another super chat. Let me see here. Donation from Anonymous for $5. Thank you very much, Anonymous. No message from it either. Well, that's very generous of you. Thank you. Anyways, let me check up on the chats here. Only Chad and Tyrone get any pussy without asking. Yeah, Chad and Tyrone mogging us, guys. We'll include Chang in there for the K-pop maxers. Because as a matter of fact, K-pop is legit. There are... they have had an increase in SMV due to the rise of K-pop. And there are actually, especially in Eastern Europe, there's a certain subgroup of women that are really into anime as well. But that's still a niche. So I wouldn't really rely on it as a, if you're rice, it's not going to be like an easy option for you, but it's an option. Like I think that Latin America maxing for Asian guys is an option because the message I've gotten from talking to guys is that if you're an Asian guy and you at least have like money to support yourself, the Hispanic women will give you will consider you an option, and they'll be happy with you as an option. Does that mean that you're going to have like the same advantage as like being a white, like tall Anglo? No, but it means that they won't view you as they won't look at you and take you for granted, you know? Like they'll see you as a serious option. Oh, yes, Deadwood, yeah. Thank you for, I don't know if that was the Autobot or whatever. Like I saw your message, but we got to be really careful how we type in the chat. Oh, Jano Mako, that was you? All right. If you want to join the server under that name or refer to yourself as that, I can pass you right through. Anyways, Dawood, I saw what you were saying there. Yeah, you got to change the word a little bit, but he was referring to hiring professionals for Snuggles, and that is also not factored in here. We don't know what percentage of these guys have used professional services to fulfill their needs. I don't think necessarily it's a huge percentage of them, but it's enough that it would tip the scales somewhat, at least a couple percentage points. Oh, your pause drive. Oh, okay, based. Okay, pause drive is already a server Chad. So, that's good. You're already aboard. And Slick on Top says, K-pop was created to increase their snuggle value. You are 100% right about that, actually. This was done, there was actually research done on this. The Korean government actively funded K-pop with the intention of using it to increase the cultural value and prestige of Korea. And they were wildly successful. And as a matter of fact, they really hit a perfect niche, because around the same time as the K-pop was rising and they were funding, like they were putting a lot of investment into K-pop, around the exact same time you had the boy band and girl band, like if you guys remember Hannah Montana and that sort of stuff, and the Backstreet Boys in the 90s, like Eiffel 65 in Europe, like if any of you remember the 90s and remember that stuff, like we had our own version of K-pop, which was Europop and like American pop. Justin Bieber, and Justin Bieber was like the last one until it kind of died off. But it's weird because there's speculation as to why the boy bands in Europe and America collapsed, and England as well collapsed. But it's almost like if there's an extinction event and then a new creature fills the niche that was left over. That's exactly what the K-pop people did. There was a leftover niche of like boy band sort of sanitized pop material, and the Koreans immediately filled that niche. What am I drinking, Mercer? Energy drink, alcohol, coffee, or just plain water? I had a Rockstar energy drink, and then I'm drinking some water after that. One of the issues you run into when you're doing monologue streaming is you end up with a sore throat if you don't keep your whistle wet, as they say. So having even something just to sip on can make a big difference. Anyways, K-pop also increased demand for plastic surgery, therefore stimulating the economy. It's one way of looking at it. Have you guys seen that photo? I'm going to see if I can find it. Hold on. Let me see here. South Korea plastic surgery jawbone wall. Let me see if I can find this here. For some reason, my mouse has vanished on me. My mouse thing. That's weird. Getting his whistle wet. Yeah, don't take that the wrong way. I mean that entirely above ground. It's an English term. There's no connotations to it. It's an English term that means you are drinking something that keeps your throat from drying out. Okay, here it is. This is what I'm looking for. There. Okay, look at this. I think I've posted this before, actually. There's this like wall in a Korean plastic surgery. The Korean government made them take it down, but it's like there were so many facial feminization surgeries that were done because Koreans, they kind of have like square faces, boxy faces. There's so many facial feminization surgeries that are done that this doctor just compiled all of the bones that he shaved off of these people and put them in a giant wall. It's like, it's kind of awesome, actually. I really like it. But apparently, it was seen as an eyesore, and the South Korean government made him take it down, which is a shame. But yeah, it's the downside is that Koreans are not that good looking. I'm not trying to shit talk Koreans, right? Not even saying that they're per se bad looking, but like if you compare the K-pop people, we got a dog barking. Hope that wasn't too annoying. If you compare the K-pop people to just the average Korean, it's the difference is way more stark than, I would even say, like Justin Bieber to like the average American, white American or whatever, or I guess he was Canadian technically, or like Avril Lavigne. Like they were attractive. They were like top 10% or maybe top 15% in terms of looks, but they weren't like top 1%. Whereas if you look at the K-pop people, they're like top 1% of looks in Korea. Like they look almost, if you combine the plastic surgery with their already like default of being like very fair skinned and very tall by Korean standards, they're already in like the top 1%. So, and it is interesting that around the same time, like it's almost like the cost that they paid. It's the toll that they paid for making Korean culture, mainstream pop culture so powerful is that their birth rate is collapsing as a consequence, almost, it seems, of making their culture so superficial and look-centric. Maybe that's just what I want it to be, or the theory I want to be true, because it vindicates what we believe, but who knows. Does anyone notice the hairy arms of Canadian women? Medications or tap water? Urko, I can actually verify, and maybe if my mouse wasn't invisible right now for some reason, I would track down a photo of my arm, because I actually have extraordinarily hairy arms. I think it's a French thing. Latin ancestry. We kind of got that greasy Mediterranean look. Even if we're a little fair-skinned, like relative to most meds. So it's probably, if I had to guess, it would be the French ancestry making us hairy. Caucasioplasty. That's one way of putting it. It's interesting because I remember when I was reading, because here's a cool thing that you could do as if you're bored at any time and all you have access to is Google, is you can take Google Translate and then run Baidu, the Japanese or the Chinese search engine, through Baidu, through Google Translate, and get it in English. And then you can like look up the Chinese internet through their portal and translate everything. And one of the weird things I found is that in Asian culture, it's considered a compliment to someone's looks if you say they have a small face. And it's kind of peculiar. This isn't something you think about when it comes to like non-Asian people, but apparently face size matters a lot to them. Gray Pill rants. Thai women are only behind Western women by like 15 years, unfortunately. Yeah, 100%. Actually, I made a, this was like a year or two ago. I made a social media, well, it wasn't a social media. It was like an app that was specific to Thailand. And I made a profile on there just to check out what the options were. And I was interacting with some of the people there. There was this one Thai girl who I talked to briefly for like, not anything actually interesting. It was like a 2-day just back and forth hi. And then she explained to me, like, because she had like a selfie of herself and her friend. And she was like way better looking than her friend by any of our standards. If we were to look at her, she was way better looking than her friend. But because she was darker skinned than her friend, that was seen as her friend, even though her friend was like a 4 and she was like a 6.5, her friend was more attractive in their culture than she was. And it was baffling to me. Because I was like, what? Yeah, okay, she's lighter skinned than you are, but you're like, you actually have good facial bones and she looks like a potato. Like, what? I don't understand that. She looked like, her friend looked like Lao Y87's wife. If you remember Lao Y87 and his wife, and she has like the buggy eyes. Like, that's how her friend looked. So that struck me as odd. I don't know if I still have a pic kicking around. I'll see if I can find one. Because I didn't really, again, it was a very brief conversation. It was more so I was just investigating, like, what to expect if I were to show up in Thailand. So I didn't really save anything. This is just sort of anecdotal on my end. But I might have, because I remember taking screenshots to show, like, because I talked about this in Medicant server back when it was happening. And I was explaining like how important skin color is in their culture for attractiveness. And I remember using screenshots of that. It's possible that Medicant might still have one of those screenshots kicking around. I'll have to ask him. But Asians are super dialed into neoteny indicators for sure. Yeah, that's true. And that's another thing, actually, come to think of it. Asians that, like, I always thought originally that when I would hear Asian guys say that, like, white guys would go after Asian girls that they didn't find attractive, I always thought that was cope. But then when I compare the actual preferences of Asian men versus white men, even like if we're looking at Asian women, there's an obvious and stark difference there. And it's like Asian men, and I would even say Asian women prefer neotenist white men. They do not like masculine looking white men, typically. And also Asian men tend to prefer like very neotenist looking Asian women and white women. Like if you remember Ella Freya, she's that Dutch girl. She's very pretty, but she made that post about how like she found every race but white men attractive. So she was like dunking on white men, like whatever. But she's a good example of that. Like she's like a very sort of almost angelic looking, like fairy type. That's the kind of white woman that Asian guys really go crazy for. Whereas the typical white woman that white men prefer tend to look a little more, not necessarily as delicate. Though not that we find that unattractive either, right? So Just like skin color implies wealth, white is rich, dark is poor, those who worked in the farms. Yeah, that seems to be the reason why. I remember having a conversation with an Indian about this because we were talking about how the skin color hierarchy worked in India, even though it wasn't really, because the skin color hierarchy in India, even though it's based on caste, like you don't even really see it map onto genetics that strongly. You see, like they'll have steppe ancestry in India, and the higher castes will have more steppe ancestry, but the lighter skin is not always exactly correlated to steppe ancestry. And steppe ancestry is basically European ancestry. And I had hypothesized that like the lighter skinned women are more desirable. Okay, if we assume that, the higher status men in those cultures are going to choose the lightest skinned women that they can find based on desirability, right? Therefore, their children, who are going to be the high status children, because it's a high caste, the high caste man has chosen this woman. Even if he himself is dark skinned, his children will be lighter skinned because he chose a lighter skinned woman. And over time, this creates an association between high status and light skin. Even if there's not really an attraction factor when it comes to the man being light skinned, it gets associated with status, I think. Whereas for women, I think it really just comes down to, in most cultures, light skin is more attractive. You know, it's weird because for me, and I've also had this conversation with other white men, we don't have really the same, I wouldn't say that there's like no preference for lighter skin, but I think it's a lot reduced in whites versus non-whites. I think non-whites tend to have a much stronger preference for lighter skin. Probably this is also true for white women. Like white women, there's this weird thing where like guys will get fixated on like what race is able to get white women the most. I think that's kind of silly, but I would say that if you're from a darker skinned ethnic group or race, you're going to face less prejudice based on your skin color from white women than from like women of other racial backgrounds due to how strong skin color is prioritized in attractiveness and status in like non-white cultures. Whereas for whites, it's not that big of a deal. I don't think it's necessarily attractive, but it's not unattractive, if that makes any sense. Black women value muscularity the most. White and Latina medium. Asian women don't like it. Yeah, Asian women do not like it at all. Ella's nudes got leaked, so she's for the street. Oh no! Oh no! That's horrifying. I hope that nobody finds those and posts those. No, I'm just kidding. We have to oppose any kind of revenge porn and hope that she can track the leaker down and shut it down. Do you think Asian and more specifically Chinese men will become more desirable towards women on a global scale if China overtakes the U.S. as top dog? You know, it depends on their cultural game, because if we look at the most desirable cultures, like the Japanese and the Koreans really top it out compared to the Chinese. Even though Japanese and Koreans, like, they are high status, wealthy cultures, but they're not dominant. Like, they don't, like, Japan doesn't have a military that can, you know, invade half the planet or whatever, right? Like, China, in theory, at least on paper, China should have, like, much stronger cultural power based on their military projection, right? And yet, like, I don't know if you guys have followed on X, but there was just recently, like, everybody loves Japan. And just recently, like, there was this tweet translator that was on by default, and so all the Japanese tweets got translated. And, like, everybody all over the political spectrum in America is, like, reposting Japanese tweets because, you know, it's like, I was thinking about it, it's like, you guys have seen Place and then Place Japan, where it has the guy soy jacking because it's Japanese. And I was thinking of doing something like that, but instead of place, I put tweet and then tweet Japan or tweet Japanese, and then everyone soy jacks over the Japanese tweet. It seems like, I would say certainly being influential culturally is a necessary element, but it's certainly not the only element. You need to actually you need to produce culture that people like and enjoy. The Koreans have pulled that off, even though I don't really understand K-pop myself and K-drama. I don't really get the appeal personally. Not my thing. A lot of people like it. A lot of people love anime. Chinese stuff, I mean, the Chinese have made some decent games from my understanding. I haven't really gamed that much, but I've been told that their games that they've made are better than people expected them to be. But you still don't hear that much about like products out of China that people want to use, like cultural products, I mean. Could be, though. We'll have to see. Stacy's coming out of Mercer's room. I heard the door closing. Yeah, this is what happens when you're a rent cell, right? You have to deal with people wandering around outside your door. Kind of sucks. And Sea Girls tell me they like European men best, then Japanese or Chinese second and third. See, Grey Pill, I'm not so sure because like we've had Aibo on again to reference this stream, and you know what? I will repost that stream somewhere. I'll track it down and repost it because we talked to him about it, and his opinion was that Thai women prefer Asian, like Northern Asian men more than white men because if they have kids with an Asian, like say a Chinese or Japanese, their kids will look more Thai, but they'll be like lighter skinned and fairer featured. Whereas if they have a kid with a white European, they'll be lighter skinned as well, but they'll look a little more foreign, and that's not that it's necessarily bad that they would be discriminated against, but they would be seen as more of an outsider. So the general impression is like, if you're going to Southeast Asia, particularly Thailand, the ideal would be you want to be like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, of that background. Not that if you're white you're not going to have a decent time or like you're going to have difficulty or whatever, but Northern Asians tend to have the best odds from what we've been told. Anime characters are drawn with European pheno, that's why they are attractive. I think the earliest anime characters definitely were. You see with the earliest styles, like in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, they're very much European looking in their construct. But as time has gone on, they've both become more abstract, and they've also become, I think, more Asian-like. And really a good example of this, in my opinion, is Frieren. Frieren, the style that she was drawn in is very non-European in terms of how she looks. Now, in that anime, there are European characters, like in terms of appearance, but the main characters are not drawn as Europeans. So I think that as time goes on, you just see more and more of that indigenous element assert itself. Because you have to remember, anime was inspired by Disney, right? Like that was the original inspiration, like where the Japanese learned to do their animation. They learned it from the Disney animation. Skiat Duquen, you didn't miss anything too important, I think. We're talking about anime now. Yeah, BP and then BP Japan. Yeah, we need it. Actually, there were some guys that they didn't call themselves BPers, but they did kind of do BP related stuff about Japan. And of course, they got super popular because they're Japanese, right? Like there was that guy who was like, I'm 39 and I'm not married and my life sucks, but he's Japanese, and so like everybody watches his YouTube videos of himself playing old video games. Yeah, Frieren. I don't know how to say it. Freeren, whatever. I don't know. What's the rundown on Iran and the women shortage? I'm afraid you're going to have to replay that part because it's pretty long-winded, and I don't think everyone else wants to hear it. But if you were to tip me $50, I would repeat it because I am a shill, and I am a corrupt Latino at heart that will violate my ethics for shekels. But hang on just 1 second, guys. I'm going to be right back. I got to run to the bathroom. right, I'm back. What are you talking about? Anyways, I did pour myself some more tea. Yeah, I poured myself some tea. Let me see here. What did I miss? I'm a pissmonger now. Brap. Anyways. Mercer, can you talk about the roles oofy doofies will play in the coming woman shortage? Yes, it is tea. Well, oofy doofies are suspiciously yellow-colored tea. Is this going to be an inside joke? Anyways, talk about the roles oofy doofies will play in the coming woman shortage. I don't know. Like, I actually believe that chance is going to have a much bigger factor. This is something I've talked about before. There is this impression that everything comes down to LMS, that you have to shush. Anyways, there is this tendency of believing that everything comes down to LMS. You have to reach a certain stat level to get a woman. I actually don't believe that. I believe that as time goes on and the woman shortage becomes more and more prevalent, there's going to be a bigger element of chance involved. Because I don't know if you guys noticed this, but when I look around and I see couples in daily life, I don't see, like, I do see typically men are better looking than women, but I also see a lot of couples where there isn't as big of an imbalance as you would think. And as a matter of fact, you have to explain situations where you find couples that are where the guy is mogged by the girl, and oftentimes people will come up with these explanations like dark doofies or whatever. I don't believe dark doofies. Mercer, are you an export? Yeah. Are you an extrovert? I took this test that somebody posted, and it said that I was an extrovert. As a matter of fact, I was actually to the right of the extrovert bell. But I don't believe it. I think that's bullshit. The first bottleneck is to get into routine contact with a large number of women to begin with. Kind of. I would say that chance does play a role, but as time goes on, or not as time goes on, as time goes on, your odds get worse and worse. Like, I'm not actually saying that you just have to try and things will happen. Like, the odds are getting worse, but it becomes like random chance becomes more and more important. Like, if you guys remember, when we used to do streams with Incel Maddox, first would talk about how he had his girlfriend and he didn't have to do anything to get this girl. I better explain dark doofies, right? Dark doofies, this is something that Western Decline brought up. And his theory is like, these women will get oofy doofies with the expectation that they will these guys are easy to manage, they're not going to cheat, they're not going to behave badly, but then they actually are cheating and behaving badly because other women also think the same thing. It's kind of like a reverse of Juggernaut theory, where it's like these women think that these are safe bets, so they'll pursue these guys or they'll show interest in these guys, and then these guys take advantage of it to cheat on their significant other. There might be something to that, but I don't necessarily believe it. I suspect more so that Could you get a girlfriend if you had, say, 100K followers on Twitter? I think if I broke 5K followers on Twitter, I could have a GF. As a matter of fact. Hang on one sec. I got a message here. Ramble. Get to the point, yo. Hey, Chairwell, if you want to make me make a point, you got to send me a super chat. Anyways, Dark Doofies, I'm not sure if I believe that theory. I don't think it's crazy. But, anyways, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought earlier. Just to get back to what I was saying, I think more likely it's just that these guys would just happen to get lucky. And they don't realize that they get lucky, and then they take it for granted. And as a matter of fact, there's another guy in my server, I won't name him, but we had conversations about this where when he was in college, he had a GF who was a nice Becky. It's just somebody pinged me on a different Discord server. I was just checking to see if maybe there was an issue with the stream, but it was just somebody whinging. Anyways, we have a guy on my server who did have a GF in college, and he sort of got into the red pill stuff, and he started to think he could actually do better than what he had. And this was like a nice girl, apparently. And he told me, like, after he broke up with her thinking he could do better, he suddenly hit the drought, and there was no other options. And he didn't realize how good he had it until that option was gone. And it was like a really bitter lesson, because you don't know when you're going to get that chance again. Now, I can't release his name unless he gives me the permission to do that. So, but yeah, it's like an example of what I'm talking about. As the first bottleneck is to get into routine contact. No, that's the same one as before. Where are you even receiving these messages? The focus on GFs detract from general social exclusion incels face, with the snuggles as the apex of this. You know what's funny about that? Here's like my incel contact with daily life that happened earlier. I went to the store or not a store, it was like a food stall, to order something, and it was a little early in the day, and I usually order a different thing later in the day at this place. And the guy who I was ordering, and I was ordering something different at this time, and the guy I was ordering from, he was like, "Oh, you're not allowed to order at this time," and because he assumed what I was going to order. And I said, "No, I'm not ordering that. I'm ordering something else. I know when I'm allowed to order that thing." And he was giving me all this attitude, and it just kind of struck me as like, all I want to do, like, I'm not trying to get service with a smile or some bullshit. I just don't want to have like sass and nastiness from these people. I just want to have like normal treatment, you know? Like, I have money that I want to give them, and I want to get food in exchange, and I want to limit the interaction to as little as possible to facilitate this economic exchange. And yet, even for these guys, it's like that's not enough. They have to make it more difficult for me. And what was interesting was, I'm pretty sure this guy was like, he came off as quite effeminate. I have a feeling that he was gay, just based on his mannerisms. Maybe not, I don't know, kids these days. But maybe it's like a sign of, because I remember when I was in college, I used to be able to get, and here's a fake sell sign, right? I used to have drinks bought for me when I was in college. But not by women, by guys. Guys would buy me drinks. And it was because I guess I was either a good conversationalist or maybe they were gay. But I guess now that I'm in my 30s, I guess I can't even, I don't even get a pass from the gays. It's like, if I was gay, I would be a gay incel now. What's the context of this video screen? Oh, it's because you arrived late to the show here. This is, these are chin bones and cheekbones of Koreans that got them carved off for plastic surgery. Okay, what's this? $5 from Phil900. Thank you very much. Do you think the USA will execute the draft? If so, will it be enough to fix the gender imbalance? Well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I don't think they'll execute the draft because they don't have the political capital for it. That would collapse the government as soon as they tried. And it wouldn't even be doable anyways because people would flee in either direction. They would flee north to Canada, they would flee south to Mexico. There would be no way of enforcing it. And even if they could, the average weight of the country and just the general health of the country is such that like they would need to do 6 months of hard boot camp for the drafted people to make them even halfway usable in a military context. They just wouldn't have they don't have the quality of population for a draft. But that's also bad news because we're never going to see a thinning out of the male population. Of course, we find all war to be tragic, and we don't wish death and suffering on anyone, but it does have to be said, one of the side silver linings of any kind of major war is that it does reduce, for the surviving men, there's reduced competition for women. Yeah, it's very sad. No, those are Korean bones. Good thing you didn't fall for the JBG propaganda. No, you know what? That reminds me of Face and LMS did a stream once where he talked about how him and I think it was like another friend of his or something took him to a gay bar. Yeah, I know it's kind of a weird context, but it made sense in context. It did not sound suspicious in context. Okay, but he went to a gay bar and like a gay guy hit on him and he felt this sense of revulsion in him. And it was like, it occurred to him. He was like, wow, this must be the same feeling that women feel when an unattractive man hits on them. You know? And yeah, that's true. Hey, I sent Sue two super chats with the link and you didn't read them. Oh, sorry, Feltree. Let me see if I can find it here. Hold on. Oh, you did. Sorry, Feltree. It says life may not be set in stone, but it's set in bone. Yeah, that's very true. And were you anonymous as well? Because I see anonymous here. Sorry, I didn't get updates on my stream elements. My bad. I mentioned it earlier, but my younger brother is an HTN white guy with blonde hair and blue eyes, and his Sea Monkey GF is not letting him hit, and she might have never let him hit, despite them being together for almost 2 years now. It is beyond over for Gen Z. True. 100%. Was there another one you sent, Feltree, or did I catch them both? Let me see if I can. I'm having this weird issue with my mouse where I can't. Maybe here. No, okay. So you must have been anonymous then, Feltree. Okay, that's good. All right, good. Anyways, let me see here. Yeah, if I don't catch your super chat, just let me know and I'll double check because I may not have gotten the update on my end. In such a scenario, why would you even associate with that sea monkey? Well, I mean, it's, you know, I do wonder about that because I have a younger brother who just turned 21 and he's actually even shorter than I am. He's about 5'5". And he, according to my mother, I didn't ask him this directly because I don't want to be nosy on this topic, but according to my mother, he has been in some kind of relationship with a Cambodian girl that he met through, he has like a cash job at a pharmacy where he works as a cashier. and he met this Cambodian girl through this job. I've never seen her. I don't know anything about what's going on there, but this is what's being alleged by my mother. I don't know if he's actually done anything with her, though. Because again, it's almost, what I've noticed with Zoomers, especially younger Zoomers, it's almost like snuggleality. I'm using the S word carefully here. It's like it's sort of self-focused. Like they don't really, it's almost like it's very uncomfortable for Zoomers to have intimate relations with someone else. I think it might be related to growing up with pornography as easily accessible as it is. Probably. Might have a role. Because it does seem like Zoomers, in my experience, don't seem to have the same issue with being without than millennials. You know, like when I used to talk to Raymond, it was an interesting comparison. How Raymond, if like Raymond Thoughts in Mind, he's a millennial, so he's a little bit older than me, because I'm a younger millennial, and you could tell like he's really frustrated, and it's because he went through the 2000s and like 2010s and did have decent experiences like before the onset of social media, smartphones, etc. But then once the dating apps hit, it's like he immediately lost access to those options, you know, because in person for non-elite guys in terms of looks, you got into relationships through meeting a girl through a social network, and then it was known as propinquity. And this is something we used to talk about on Inky Maddox as well. Propinquity is where attraction grows through familiarity. Like once the girl knows you for a while and you become like a consistent part of her life, she develops an attraction to you. And this is a well-known phenomenon, and that is completely erased after social media. And what's this? Are politicians and elites always get out of military service due to BS medical conditions? Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure Trump also did that as well, right? Just use their same tactics if you don't want to serve. They might intimidate you, but it's just mind games. Well, I can tell you what happens. If they ever do a draft, which I highly doubt again, like even if they're in support roles, they still have to meet a minimum fitness requirement. And something like 2/3 of Gen Z can't fit that. And God knows how bad millennials are, because remember, we're older, right? They just raised the draft age to 42, or the age of military service to 42. That tells you that they know that their stats are very bad, right? And it, something else that this reminds me of, actually, now that I think about it, and I talked about it when I first did my stream on the Iran war, and I showed that there was like that American soldier who was like, "Oh, I want to be a good occupier of Iran when we conquer the country, but I just can't resist these brown women." Or he did like a TikTok of something like that, and it's like it's almost like you're starting to see this consciousness that in order to get young men interested in fighting a war for you, you have to literally offer them booty as like a reward, almost like it's the Dark Ages again, and you're trying to like gather together a horde of marauders to go and pillage some other country, you know? My younger brother seems like he's afraid to ask her because he's scared she'll leave. Seems like she doesn't feel any pressure and that'll cause him to leave. You know what? There's a lot of people that are afraid of guys that are afraid of like being accused of harassment and also being accused of being creepy. And it's ironic because the way that creepiness has been weaponized is like such a status destroying thing for men. It's resulted in men being really afraid of like the kind of men that women should want are like in terms of their personality types, like that are respectful of women in theory, right? They're really terrified of expressing interest in a woman because they don't want to come off as being creepy. But that means that the guys that don't have that same sensitivity are the ones that are approaching women. So it's almost like a self-defeating thing. It's like the guys that you actually worry about, who are the real creeps, they don't really care whether you're uncomfortable or not. It's the ones that do care that are now afraid, you know? Yeah, I am set to live chat, Anton. Yeah, being creepy equals veering out of your socially permitted NPC programming. 100%. Doesn't help that my brother is literally the most normie person I know. Yeah, there was this guy, I'm trying to remember the name of his channel. He wasn't really he wasn't an incel. Like, he had a girlfriend in the past. He was this black guy who would do like TFL content, but it was like he was fairly normie by our standards. But I remember he came up with this idea of, well, he was like a black American guy. I can't remember the name of his channel, but he came up with this idea of, or he popularized this idea of sexual false consciousness. And it sounds like kind of spurgy and whatever, but it was an interesting idea. And it's like, there's this Marxist concept of false class consciousness, where it's basically like all the barely surviving normies that are struggling to survive, they all think they're temporarily embarrassed millionaires, so they support the system that allows the real millionaire class to continue to profit at everyone else's expense. And it's sort of, if you apply that to the dating market, it actually can fit pretty well as well. Where because everybody's afraid of being identified. Now, this, I should clarify, by the way, that this was back in this was before COVID, that this stuff was being talked about. So his channel was before COVID. So almost 10 years ago now, god damn. So it's probably, culturally, it's changed since then, but at the time, if you were identified as one of these guys who was having trouble dating, it was like social suicide, you know? So there was this intense pressure to avoid being identified as such. And he called it sexual false consciousness, because everybody had to project this impression that they were really successful, and therefore nobody could talk about the real problems. Yeah. Booty is like water, BW. Oh yeah, Booty Warrior. I loved adding that clip. I was looking for a reason to use that clip in a video, and I finally found one. It was excellent. Trump got BS shin splints to get out of NAM. All the elites always have some BS waivers. Best attorneys on deck. 100%. Like, yeah, they're not going to send their kids to die. And this is something I was talking about with regards to Israel too, right? Like, it's because of how small Israel is as a country, it's really critical that they don't give the impression that their elites can just get out of war and get out of combat. But because of the situation now, like, there's real risk of getting killed. You are actually seeing a lot of these guys. And the ones that don't, I mean, to be fair, there are some that don't, like, what's his name? Smotrich. His kid got blown up, shot in the liver by a Hezbollah soldier, and is like dying or something. So it's not all of them, but there are a lot of them that don't want that happening to their kids. So it becomes like it could become a real cultural crisis for them. It already is, because the ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel, they get out of military service just through hiding in yeshivas. It's pretty funny. I mean, Romania is the exact same, except the equipment is utter ass. Yeah, but who's going to invade Romania, really? Like, let's be honest here. Who's going to invade Romania? So, see what else we got here. Just be war courted, bro. I've seen several TikToks of women talking about getting hit on by an ugly man is offensive to them. It seems that all creepy really means is that you hurt a woman's inflated ego. That is true. I don't know if... Well, here's the thing. We tend to think about it from our perspective where it's like if any woman expresses interest in us, we're like, holy shit, like that's made our day. Even if it's not like an attractive woman, just having that is like because it so rarely happens. But for women, it's honestly like snuggle interest is expressed so often that it almost becomes like a nuisance for them, and sometimes it feels almost threatening, right? For them, I imagine, because it's like, oh well, these guys are, I'm trying to look at it from their perspective, like they're a lot physically larger than women are. Like we can actually pose a threat to them. I could kind of understand why they would feel uncomfortable in some cases, but still, it's a different universe. Russia would, since Russia hates Moldova, they'll likely win in Ukraine. I don't think so, man. Like, I was one of these people who thought Russia was going to steamroll Ukraine within a year. I was under the impression Ukraine, it was just going to be GG. But it's year 3.5 now, I think. I think it was 2023 when Russia invaded. Or is it 2022? But it's been several years now, and they've barely moved an inch. Like, I remember reading something recently. It was like an OSINT account that's a pro-Russia OSINT account. And it was like claiming Putin or the Russian cabinet, someone like that, claims that they've annexed or they've captured 10% more Ukrainian territory in 2025 or something like that. Or like a year from now, or a year to now, we've captured 10% more Ukrainian territory. And I'm like, okay, this is less than 1% per month that you are moving. Like, that's like World War II or World War I tier movement. Because, like, if you know anything about World War I, we got bogged down in these trenches due to the technology at the time, and the battlefronts would barely budge an inch left or right. And it would be like, if you were going over the top out of the trenches, it would be equivalent to these guys that are getting blown up by these drones now, So I really don't think so. I think eventually I do think Russia will win, just due to the differences in attrition, right? Russia can just tolerate more attrition than Ukraine in the long run. That's just what it comes down to. But I think once they do win, they're going to win like the Donbass, and they're going to win a land bridge to Crimea, and that's it. And I guarantee you after that point, there's no way in hell they want to get any further because they don't want to repeat this nightmare. I was actually saying yesterday to some other guys in a VC that the way that the war unfolded in Russia and Ukraine proved that Russia's fears about Ukraine getting armed and then attacking them were unfounded. Because if you look at how Russia invaded Ukraine initially, they did the same thing they did in Georgia in 2007, I believe it was, where in Georgia there was like a pro-American president that came to power, Saakashvili, and he wanted to there was immediately these two provinces in Georgia that were trying to break away and join Russia because Saakashvili was turning on Russia. It was South Ossetia and South Abkhazia or something like that. And the Russians just rolled in their tanks to Tbilisi, the capital, and just parked their tanks there, maybe blew up some anti-air defense as just a symbolic thing, and scared the Georgians into backing down. And they did the exact same thing in Ukraine. They didn't do a proper invasion, right? They just sort of rolled their tanks in a symbolic fashion. They blew up some air defense, again, symbolically, and then tried to scare the Ukrainians into accepting Russian demands. But the Ukrainians fought back, hit their flanks, and fucked them up on both sides of their flanks. Right? And as a consequence, they ended up getting driven almost all the way back to their borders. And then they've been fighting ever since, an attrition war. But it's like, if you consider how exposed they were and how badly their supply lines got hit in the beginning of that war because of how stupid their opening was, there would never have been a way for Ukraine to attack Russia and force Russia into a defensive war. There's no way that the Ukrainians could have ever done that, ever. So Russia's fears were unfounded to begin with, because it would have ended up even worse than what it is now for Ukraine, you know. So it was just Putin getting baited into attacking Ukraine and fucking up the relationship between Europe and Russia, especially their energy relationship. And so it was a success from the American standpoint. The Americans won that war as soon as the Nord Stream pipeline was blown up. They won. At that point, then everything else was just upside. Actually, I think American men want to go to war. They just aren't meeting the standard, and the leftist elite are afraid of giving young men military training. I do wonder, because, there was a lot of fragging in Vietnam. Of commanding officers getting blown up by their subordinates in Vietnam. And arguably, the thing is, like in Vietnam, you could at least make the argument that it was in America's interest to contain communism and support the South. We don't want all of Asia to fall to communism. We need to defend this. Like, you could make that argument, and it's a reasonable argument. You can't make that argument in Iran, especially since Iran is a much tougher nut to crack than Vietnam, right? So it would be like, I really do want to see a land invasion happen, because I know what a disaster it would be. When are robot girlfriends going to be semi-mainstream? That's a good question. The biggest sting issue right now is not actually the girlfriends, the robot waifus themselves or whatever. Like the technology's there, as I talked about in my video on China, where I think that it's going to be like a nightmare scenario that will unfold there. Government will take control of reproduction, basically. But the technology for creating synthetic robot companions is there. The issue is artificial wombs. That's really the cutoff point. And the problem as well is that if they're not controlled by the government in terms of what they can do and not do, they're just going to end up becoming like goon bots that will like enslave whatever man buys them to his like most base desires, basically, because that's what the market would tend towards. It would tend towards snuggle gratification. It wouldn't tend towards anything else. Like the reason why I think China will end up differently is because the state will centrally control them. Western military recruitment works a lot like Ptolemaic Egypt. They were so terrified of arming Egyptian locals that they imported foreign immigrant mercenaries. Maybe, but here's the problem. Mercenaries don't work that well. I mean, I talked about this in my first stream on Iran. They tried mercenaries in Yemen, and you cannot pay mercenaries enough to blow themselves up, taking territory for you. You can pay mercenaries to do security guard jobs, basically, and like keep watch on avoiding incursions by enemies and whatever. You can't pay them to throw their lives away to capture land for you. And the U.S. still has Marines that are very well paid and that are like high status guys that are going to be loyal. I don't think they'll ever have a problem with the Marines. But there's only so many Marines. And if they're going to take Iran on, they would need to do like a proper draft that would honestly be like double what Vietnam required. Double what Iraq required, minimum. Double what Iraq required. And I don't think that they have that option now. Like at least in Iraq, there was the fumes of 9/11 that everybody was high on. Imagine robotics technology for immersive robot GFs is still 20 years out. Yeah, but they don't. How immersive do they have to be, really? If you think about it, how immersive do they have to be? Like you already have people becoming like obsessively in love with their chatbots. And these are like very early, if you think about it, in terms of the technology. And people will be willing to convince themselves of what they want. Even if it's like not that convincing to us. Like that's how the human mind works. If you want something enough, or if you're desperate enough. And that's who they would be looking at, right? So what I think would be scarier to me is what they could do to what this could do to family structures. Like, as I said, I suspect the Chinese are going to deal with their excess male problem by like allowing men without women to reproduce using these synthetic options. And it's like, what kind of psychological impact would it have for you to be raised by like a synthetic machine that's imitating a mother as opposed to an actual mother? Like, it's kind of horrifying to think of, you know? She's saying the server, the Chinese would tax women super heavily if they didn't contribute their eggs as a tithe. Yeah, I think that's one strategy they could use, for sure. Because if you look at what the CCP is doing, they're already blaming women for the birth rate problem. And to be fair, I mean, they're technically correct, because it's women that do not want to get married. And the women would argue, well, we don't have incentives to get married. Like, this and this is why we don't want to get married. It just doesn't make sense for us. And that's like, fair. Okay, fair. But it still is technically, you are the limiting factor here. There's like twice as many Chinese men that want to get married as you. So the government's going to blame you. And they're going to impose incentives on you to make you do what they want. So, and I suspect in the end, they're going to just give up on trying to force Chinese women to get pregnant, because it's just going to be politically easier to do it themselves. And it gives them options to socially engineer the population that just having Chinese women reproduce by force or like really heavily coercing them would not, you know? And it would be easier to do in terms of PR as well, just to like do like synthetic wombs and stuff. How much do men care about reproduction, really? I think it varies a lot based on, can women raise children, though? That's a very good question. I don't know. How much do men care about reproduction, really? It feels like a mating strategy low-value ones pick up. I think it varies based on race and culture and ethnicity. In cultures like China, Japan, Korea, they're much more conscientious as a people. Like, they're much more concerned about fulfilling their obligations to society and being viewed positively by their culture. Whereas like whites are very individualistic. We don't think much about what our culture and society is looking for. You know, we're more focused on what we get out of it, you know, for better or worse. And if you like, there's been polling done on this, and it's something like the majority of Chinese men, or like if you poll men in China on how many children they want, without any other constraints, like if you take away economic constraints, the average Chinese man wants 2.8 children. Whereas if you look at if you do the same polling for women, it's 0.8 children. They have actually the biggest divide between men and women out of any group, except for South Korea, which I think also has a very similar divide between the number of desired children. I hate me mom. I'd rather have had Kara from Detroit become human raise me, honestly. You know, I mean, it sounds crazy, but there's a lot of things that are normal now that would be considered completely crazy, right? Like surrogacy, for example, would be considered outlandish, or like euthanasia is another one, or MAID, as they say. So we have a tendency to assume normalcy bias, you know? Brutal, YouTube hid my comment. It's over for sip cells. Yes, I'm sipping. Yeah, I have tea instead of, I have two options. I have energy drinks / Coke Zero, or I have tea. And tea is a much better option for avoiding screwing your teeth up. So if I get enough energy from my energy drink, I just sip tea. Is there some way that you could reword your comment, Darzog? Because I do have it set up to remove comments if there's certain words that are said, just to avoid the stream getting taken down, you know? But if you reword it, maybe use euphemisms, then you might be able to get around it. Yeah, I did talk about the woman shortage topic. Like with birth rates collapsing, we're going to see the same problems in first world countries that are going to be replicated everywhere. And like these countries like the Philippines and even Africa, like where there's this association with like women being really eager to, like it being easy for a man to like find a wife in these countries because there's this abundance of young women that are looking for husbands or whatever. That's going to disappear. And actually, as a matter of fact, we're already seeing it in places like Thailand. Thailand, they're actually aging very rapidly. Their birth rate has gone down quite fast. And I think, now I have no direct evidence of this, but my suspicion is that the phenomenon of transformers in their culture, male to female transformers, I suspect that that's connected in some way to the gender ratio, because it's not only do they have the same gender ratio problems that Northern Asian countries have, because their average age is actually quite old now, similar to Japan and South Korea. But they also have a lot of expats that go there. And because the country's poorer than, say, Japan or Korea, there's a lot of men with economic leverage that can outcompete the local man for a wife. So I have a suspicion, can't prove it yet, but I bet you that there's a connection there. These synthetic waifus are going to lead to CRISPR becoming incredibly popular. Once again, Alyssa Liu proves that the precedent for designer babies is definitely going to be big. That's what I'm saying. Like, people have this normalcy bias that these things that would be unimaginable. Okay, so there's been sperm donors and stuff for a long time, but the idea of like selecting an egg without having a partner, really, and like selecting it just purely for eugenic purposes, that would be unimaginable 10 years ago. And yet here we are. Look at this Alyssa Liu chick. She's become the poster girl for figure skating, right? Like, everybody loves her, and it's become normalized now. Have you seen the new law in Brazil? Literally a gynocentric republic. Well, you know what else is curious about Brazil is the fertility rate in Brazil dropped. I think it was one of the first Latin American countries to drop below replacement. Very curious. Thailand has been below replacement since 1993. Yeah, it has been. It's hard to find numbers on Thailand because I don't know if they keep good data or if the data is in Thai or something, but I would really be interested in seeing how the average age trends upwards, because we have data from South Korea showing that around the mid to late 90s, the number of divorced South Korean women marrying previously unmarried South Korean men surpassed the number of South Korean divorced men marrying unmarried South Korean, like never married South Korean women. And it was in the late 90s, and this was preceded by a gender ratio problem at birth very similar to China's. Like, people don't usually know this, but South Korea had a sex-selective abortion problem very similar to China's, where they had ratios as high as like 116 boys for every 100 girls in some years. If there are issues with the comments, let me see if there's something I can do about the moderation. See if... Hang on. Community moderation. Let me see if there's an option here to... I thought I was pretty lenient. Like, it was just the usual words. You know what I mean? See if I can fix this. Content controls. Let's see here. Moderation basic. Let's do none. Okay, I'll do none for now, and we'll see how it goes. Well, actually, I'm pretty much ready to wrap it up now because it's been 3 hours. So, sorry if there were some issues with the comments. I'll custom tailor the comments a little better for the next stream. And also for anybody who, yeah, I liked it. I'm gonna dig in and see if I can modify the moderation to be a little more selective, so that we don't, because again, I really want to avoid getting a stream nuked like last time, but it shouldn't be so difficult that you guys are writing innocuous stuff and it doesn't show up. That's really annoying. So I'll figure that one out. But anyways, guys, if you donated, feel free to hit the link in the description to check out my Discord server, and just demonstrate that it's you that did the dono. It doesn't matter how much; could just be $1, and I'll welcome you aboard. And yeah, thanks, guys. It was great. Great stream. It's nice to have new guys that were in here. So yeah.